I'm the Dolphin of France. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326 Terrible French Artillery. Due to cash reasons, please visit the Bookbar website directly to watch the fastest chapter update. Just when Hild was confidently thinking about how to kill those hateful French artillery, he was shocked to find that the cannons began to move. He subconsciously looked back and saw that he had only run 400 steps, which should have taken less than 2 minutes. In other words, the French artillery only took such a short time to complete the harness and start maneuvering. How is this possible? He saw the French artillery retreating. His eyes almost bulged with bloodshot, and he immediately gritted his teeth and shouted, "Speed up! We must stop those cannons, just now." The French cavalry artillery fired at least 9 rounds, causing hundreds of casualties to the Dutch army. If they were allowed to escape, their morale would be severely hit point in an instant. The cavalry of the 6 squadrons began to gallop at full speed. Although it was not as fast as a charge, it was the limit of what the horses could bear at this distance point. However, the French cannons were running very fast. Hild estimated that they were almost as fast as the cavalry trotting point, especially the long-shaped pointed-roofed carriages, which were almost running into the French infantry lines. When his cavalry finally arrived at the firing position of the French cavalry artillery, the cannons had already disappeared. Hild's deputy panted and said, "These guys are running faster than foxes." Hild listened to the heavy breathing of the war horses and cavalry beside him, and his brows were twisted into a ball. There was definitely something wrong with the speed of the French roping horses just now. No, they almost didn't even have the process of roping horses, and the cannons began to retreat. He naturally didn't know that this was the new cavalry artillery equipment and combat mode that Joseph brought to the Guards Corps. Those cannons had never been untied. When they found that the Prussian cavalry was attacking, the gunners immediately drove their horses away. The soldiers on the cannons used a capstan to close the distance between the cannons and the horses, and finally used a buckle that could be hung with a push to fix the rear of the gun carriage behind the driver's seat. As for the ammunition cart, it was even faster. Push the gunpowder box and the ammunition rack into the carriage and turn around and leave. The ammunition cart is located behind the cannon, very close to the horses, and there is almost no problem with the cart. The speed of a well-designed ammunition cart is almost the same as that of a public carriage in the city. This is also the reason why the cavalry artillery of the Guards dared to bombard the enemy in the face. In the Napoleonic era, this tactic also had a name, called artillery group close shooting, commonly known as cannons with bayonets. However, the Guards did not fully implement the close shooting tactics just now, otherwise they would have used shotgun shells to bombard the Prussian cavalry head-on. After all, this battle did not require them to fight so hard. In fact, if Joseph had not ordered to take the Dutch infantry line seriously, Berthier would not have let the cavalry artillery come out to show such a hand. Just when Hild was full of annoyance, the guard beside him suddenly looked into the distance. "Sir, it seems to be French cavalry." Hild hurriedly listened carefully and found the faint sound of horse hooves coming from the east. He was immediately nervous. He had almost exhausted his horsepower just now in order to chase those fast-moving French artillerymen. If he was attacked by the French cavalry at this time, his people would definitely be no different from fixed targets. He hurriedly ordered 2 squadrons to be left behind, and the others immediately withdrew to their own positions. However, his warhorse just walked slowly with its nostrils wide open, and the sound of horse hooves behind him was getting closer and closer. Finally, Hild left the cavalry behind to fight with the Guards. To be honest, the quality of the cavalry of the Guards was really not as good as that of the Prussian Junker nobles. Half of them learned riding skills after entering the Paris Police Academy, and the cavalry absorbed from the French Guards at that time had some experience. But at this time, they were facing some fixed targets that could not run. After a flank charge, the Prussian cavalry lost their will to resist and dismounted to surrender. Hild looked back and saw this scene, cursing the French artillery even more viciously. Then he saw that those damned cavalry artillery actually circled behind the French infantry and rushed from the west to the front of the Dutch infantry line less than 200 steps and began to set up artillery. At the same time, the infantry line of the Guards Corps was also approaching rapidly. No matter how fanatical the southern Dutch soldiers were, no matter how the priests in the team could stabilize the morale of the army, facing the cannons that kept spitting grape shit in their faces and could not effectively fight back, no one could keep their morale from collapsing. After nearly 1,000 soldiers were killed by the French cavalry artillery, the first infantry line of the Dutch began to become chaotic. In fact, it was a very remarkable achievement that they could withstand nearly 20 rounds of grape shit before they began to become chaotic. General Witt saw the situation of his own infantry line through the telescope and hurriedly ordered the second line to push forward. At this time, the rhythmic drumbeats of the French infantry were heard from the front battlefield. Berthier grasped the rhythm very accurately. Just when the two Dutch infantry lines were rotating, he ordered the Guards Corps to attack in a column. The roar of Prussian cannons was immediately heard on the hillsides on both sides. Although only solid bullets could be used due to the long distance, it still posed a considerable threat to the Guards Corps. But soon, the Guards Corps cavalry artillery had moved to the side of the Prussian artillery position on the east side and began to suppress the attack. The Prussian artillery had no choice but to turn its muzzle to fight back. The pressure on the infantry of the Guards Corps suddenly relaxed. More than a dozen infantry columns quickly attacked 30 steps in front of the Dutch defense line. The opponent was retreating in panic, and there was no danger at all at this distance, and then very skillfully spread out into a line formation, launching a round of close-range attacks on the Dutch army. Volley from a distance. Before General Witt's 2nd Infantry line could press forward, he heard intensive gunfire from the front, and then his own broken troops ran over. The training time of the Dutch was very short. At this time, those who retreated did not know how to walk from both sides, and those who advanced did not know how to open a gap to let the defeated troops pass. The two sides immediately crowded together. The infantry line of the Guards Corps has appeared more than 100 steps away. Blücher was still discussing with his staff how to perfectly double team the French army when he saw a communications soldier quickly walk into the tent and hand him a roll of battle reports. Blücher couldn't help but smile when he saw Major Crystal's seal on the paint. It seemed that the town of Dunkirk had been captured. In this way, when he defeated the French army, Luxembourg may have fallen into the hands of Crystal. He calmly opened the scroll, but his face froze. It said that there were a large number of French troops garrisoned in the town of Dunkirk, and there was no way to start. Crystal applied to return to join the main force. The French actually still have troops left in Dunkirk? Blücher frowned and handed the note to the staff officer aside. Before he finished speaking, the tent was opened again, this time by a communication soldier whose face was covered in gunpowder smoke and blood. While the latter handed the battle report to Blücher, he already said in a hoarse voice, General Witt's defense line has been defeated. What? Blücher was shocked when he heard this. He opened the battle report several times and saw the news of the defeat of the Dutch army. Below it was Hild's signature. Chapter 327 Miscalculation. Blücher kicked over the Italian-style carved chair, grabbed the collar of the signal soldier, and asked sternly, "What is going on? How many French people are here?" "About 10,000 or more." The latter lowered his head and said tremblingly, "Their infantry line only launched one attack and broke through the Dutch battle line. 10,000 people." Blücher loosened his grip and let go of the communications soldier, but he still shook his head. Even if the estimate of the size of the enemy army was wrong, the 5,000 Dutch troops, plus the cavalry and artillery sent by themselves, totaled nearly 7,000 people blocking the mountain pass with the defense line deployed in advance. It shouldn't be a problem to withstand 10,000 French troops for a whole day. But right now, they only lasted about an hour. Could it be that the Duke of Brunswick was wrong in his assessment of the fighting prowess of the southern Netherlands? Those guys are actually just weak losers. It's not right. Blücher immediately shook his head again. Those same people, carrying the Austrian army that far outnumbered them, fought extremely tenaciously, even surpassing the Prussian infantry in terms of morale. General, the staff officer on the side, saw him wandering around and reminded loudly, "How should we respond now?" Blücher suddenly came to his senses. Yes, now is not the time. to worry about the fighting power of the southern Netherlands. Your own army has been cut off in the middle by the French. If it is not handled properly, it is likely to be annihilated. He tried to calm himself down, walked quickly to the map, pondered for a while, pointed to a position marked the regiment left 1,000 men to keep an eye on Leo, and the other troops immediately withdrew. The Dietland army must arrive here before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He clicked hard on the southeast direction on the map. After the French army broke through the defense line of the southern Netherlands army, it became the French army's back there. Blücher took a deep breath at the end. Maximy and his 2 regiments are delaying the French army here. The artillery and the rest of the infantry moved north to set up a defense line in the town of Wensel. We still have a strength advantage. As long as we fight steadily, we will definitely be able to repel the French on the frontal battlefield. After losing Witt's South Netherlands army and part of the cavalry, Blücher still had 16,000 soldiers in his hands. If he joined the Prussian army stationed in the Wensel area, his army would be close to 2,000 of people. At this time, Blücher only needs to shrink the main force backward and the legions sent in the east and west directions to shrink inward, so as to form a pocket formation. Then, with the help of military superiority, the unfavorable situation was reversed in one fell swoop. Yes, General. The herald turned around and walked out of the tent, quickly spreading his order to the entire army. On a gentle slope a few kilometers away in the northeast, Leo looked at the gathering Prussian troops with a pale face and said to Lefebvre in a trembling voice, "Major, there are about 6 or 7,000 enemies here, and they are also carrying cannon. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's troops haven't arrived yet. Should we retreat to the north first?" Although Lefebvre also had a serious look on his face, he only had 2,000 men in hand. Leo's Austrian army was almost useless, and it would definitely be extremely difficult to deal with the Prussian army of more than 6,000 with cannons. But he shook his head firmly. "No, His Highness will definitely come to reinforce us before noon." He immediately smiled again. "Even if His Highness hadn't come, I wouldn't have left here. Retreating is not an honor for soldiers." Just when he was about to let the cavalry sneak attack the Prussians' cannon while they were organizing their formation, he suddenly saw a chaos in the enemy's position. He hurriedly raised his telescope and looked, and saw more than a dozen Prussian heralds riding horses back and forth in the military formation, obviously announcing very important orders. Not long after, a hussar came over with a whip and shouted to him, "Master, the rear column of the Prussian army is turning and seems to be retreating." Lefebvre's eyes immediately lit up. He patted Leo's shoulder hard and laughed. "Look, let me tell you, Your Highness is here to help us." Although the latter's military rank was 3 ranks higher than his, he smiled and nodded indifferently at this time. "Yes, you are right. We are finally safe. Oh, thank God. Praise to the heroic Crown Prince. Now, I have to go back to the tent and have a cup of coffee to calm my nerves." "Wait." Lefebvre held him back, and at the same time, raised his telescope to observe again. "If the Prussians retreated because of His Highness's attack, we cannot let them do what they want." Leo was stunned for a moment. What do you want to do?" Lefebvre smiled. "We take the initiative." No. Are you kidding?" Lefebvre proved that he was serious with practical actions. Only half an hour later, his regiment and the 2 accompanying cavalry companies dragged the Austrian army and began to launch a fierce attack on Prussia on the opposite side. The reason why Lefebvre wanted to bring the Austrian army was because he knew that the Prussians' target was Leo, so as long as the Austrian army was around, the Prussian attack firepower would fall more on them. Altman, the Prussian commander responsible for chasing Leo, never expected that the Austrians, who were absolutely inferior in strength, would dare to take the initiative. However, Margrave Blücher's order was for him to immediately return for reinforcement. At this time, except for the 1,000 people at the rear, the other soldiers had already entered a marching state. He had no choice but to grit his teeth and urge the troops to evacuate faster, as the Marquis's deployment was the most important point. But before his main force had walked out a kilometer, there was a sound of horse hooves behind him. Lefebvre was sure to win, even if he faced the same number of Prussian troops, not to mention that there were only 1,000 enemy troops. He personally led the column to charge and almost unimpededly defeated the trailing troops, and then followed Altman closely. Murat looked at the winding Prussian marching column in the distance, and his heart was excited. Today, the Guards Corps has been on the defensive, and he has no chance to gain military merit. Now he finally has the opportunity to make up for his boast against this kind of infantry without a formation. It is not impossible to kill 10 of them. With the order from the cavalry company commander, Murat began to trot and then waved his saber to kill the Prussian cavalry who rushed to defend. Blücher's guards had just loaded his luxurious furniture onto the carriage and were about to urge their horses forward when they saw two hussars rushing past them like crazy and shouting at Blücher not far ahead, "General, there are a large number of French troops behind us." Chapter 328. The young emperor trying his hand at fighting. Blücher immediately pulled the reins, turned his head with wide eyes and asked, "Are you sure that it is not the cavalry coming to harass us?" "It is definitely not harassment, General, due to cache reasons. Please visit the Bookbar website directly with your browser to watch the fastest chapter update." The two hussars looked at each other. "We saw cannons, and there are at least 3 or 4 regiments of troops." Blücher felt a buzz in his head. Did these French people have wings? In order to speed up, he ordered the soldiers to throw down a lot of baggage, but just after the camp was moved, the French had already caught up. Well, how could he know that the Guards Corps had almost no baggage except for shells and gunpowder? Even His Royal Highness the Crown Prince did not bring a bed, let alone other officers. An hour ago, Joseph defeated the Dutch army, leaving only 1 regiment to clean up the battlefield and 2 battalions to take care of the wounded. The other soldiers did not even rest and immediately rushed towards the Prussian main force. Soon, other hussars came to report the approach of the French army. Blücher had no choice but to order the entire army to line up on the spot and prepare to meet the enemy. The Prussian army, which had just entered the marching state, immediately stopped and began to form a team. The baggage vehicles hurriedly rushed to the rear team. For a time, nearly 10,000 troops were mixed together, and in chaos Blücher had just arranged 3 infantry lines, and the French cavalry had already appeared less than 1 kilometer away, followed by infantry. "Is the artillery position ready?" Blücher asked the staff officer next to him with a dark face. The latter asked several messengers again, and then turned around and said, "General, the artillery is rushing to the high ground, and it should take half an hour to be in place. Let them hurry up." Blücher didn't know why this French army always made him feel uneasy. Only the artillery could make him feel a little more at ease. "Yes, General." After a series of reconnaissance and probing by both Prussia and France, the infantry line of the Guards Corps had approached 500 steps away from the Prussians, and it was not until this time that Blücher finally got the detailed number of French troops. 11,000. He frowned and silently thought in his heart that, as long as the Altman Corps and the Dietland Corps could get back in time, they could still form a siege on the French. "Try harder." The commander of the artillery battalion of the Guards Corps pointed to the mound ahead and shouted to the soldiers who were helping the horses to pull the cannons. "The Prussians have dispersed their forces. As long as we start shooting, they will soon be defeated." Nearly 4,000 artillerymen immediately shouted excitedly, "Defeat the Prussians. The glory of victory belongs to us. Let those bumpkins have a taste of power. Long live the artillery." They can be said to be proud of today's battle. In previous wars, artillery was always the foil of infantry. Even military textbooks say, even if artillery can achieve great results, it still depends on infantry to end the battle in the end. And today's battle against the southern Netherlands was almost the cavalry artillery using its elusive close-range bombardment to defeat the enemy's defense line. The infantry just went up to clean up the mess, if it weren't for the fact that there were too many cavalrymen on Blücher's side. And the horses of the Guards cavalry artillery were too exhausted. They would really want to repeat that scene on Blücher. Just as the cannon in the front was about to be dragged up the mound, a thin captain with a high-nose bridge in the team was looking at the surrounding terrain, and from time to time he used a telescope to observe the deployment of the Prussian army. Suddenly he put away the telescope, walked quickly to the battalion commander, of the artillery battalion, raised his hat and saluted, saying, "Commander, I don't think the most suitable artillery position is this mound." The battalion commander Lacoste frowned, remembering that the crown prince seemed to care about this young officer, so he patiently explained to him, "This is the deployment of the staff, Captain Buonaba." He pointed to the vaguely visible Prussian army formation on the west side. "Here we can directly bombard the enemy's infantry line, and there is no open space around that is conducive to the cavalry formation. It is an excellent shooting position." Napoleon pursed his lips, mustered up the courage to point to a gentle slope further west. "My lord, I think that is the most ideal artillery position, Major." Lacoste was slightly startled, raised his telescope, and looked at the place he said, but immediately smiled. "Captain, it is indeed closer to the enemy, and the oblique shooting angle is also good. But you probably didn't notice that there is a bush a little to the left between that position and the Prussian army. When the Prussian infantry is bombarded, as long as they move slightly to that side, we will lose their sight." "Yes." Napoleon nodded vigorously. "This is exactly the advantage of that place." "Ah." Lacoste blinked in surprise. Napoleon took a breath and explained, "The more fierce our artillery fire, the more the enemy wants to get closer to the bush. But the enemy at a distance cannot get through. This is likely to tear their infantry lines apart. On a real battlefield, the two armies usually fight in a large area, and it is common for infantry lines to stretch for several kilometers, so the soldiers in the line can't see where their teammates who are farther away are, and what they are doing. Including officers. If the communication is not smooth, they will lose the understanding of their own situation." Lacoste looked at the artillery position suggested by Napoleon again, and suddenly felt that the situation he said was very likely to happen. He thought for a moment, nodded, and told the signalman to report to the staff that he wanted to send some artillery to the new position, and then ordered Napoleon's artillery company to turn around. More than 10 minutes later, the roar of the artillery kicked off the prelude to the decisive battle. It was the artillery of the Guards Corps. The shells of 15 6-pound cannons flew over the 1st Infantry line of the Prussian army with a heart-pounding whistle, plowing more than 10 furrows in the green grass. Blücher was shocked again. Why the French came from afar, but they were the first to fire. He frowned and ordered 5 cavalry squadrons and a battalion of skirmishers to attack the French artillery, and urged his artillery to fight back as soon as possible. Napoleon commanded his company's 5 6-pound cannons, quietly hiding in a large patch of weeds, waiting for the opportunity. As an experienced commander, Blücher was extremely cautious when fighting in large groups, and used his experience to resolve the Guards Corps' repeated pulling and harassment. The frontal infantry lines of the Prussian and French armies inevitably approached each other. Amid the dense drumbeats and the officers' shouts, it seemed that both sides would rely on their training and morale to decide the winner at this moment. Less than 400 steps away from the right wing of the Prussian army, a sudden burst of fire broke out, and 5 6-pound shells accurately penetrated into the Prussian army's line formation. The Prussian infantrymen who were suddenly attacked wailed. Napoleon saw the hits in the telescope and smiled. His ballistic calculations have always been the best in the military academy. At this distance, without calibration, it was not difficult for him to hit once. Chapter 329. The artillery captain in desperate situation. Previously, the French artillery fire came from the west position in the middle of the battlefield, and the Prussian officers' attention was also concentrated there. At this time, artillery shells suddenly flew out near the edge of the Prussian right wing, and both soldiers and officers were caught off guard. The frightened soldiers stopped moving forward, but there was no officer to restrain and command, and there was an immediate chaos in the Q point, because those 5 artillery shells were so accurate that they caused 28 casualties in the infantry line. At that time, an experienced Prussian veteran shouted, "That must be the French artillery battalion, otherwise it would not be possible. Could have shot so many people." His words caused even greater chaos. It wasn't until the hurried officers whipped him to the ground that the frightened noises around him subsided. The Napoleon regiment, which was promoted to an artillery battalion by the enemy, restored its artillery positions and completed the loading of ammunition at an extremely agile speed. There were 5 loud bangs almost simultaneously, and the shells drew a low arc and accurately hit the Prussian infantry line again. It's just that this time the Prussians have dispersed a bit, and the results are almost half as compared to last time. Napoleon observed the battle in the telescope, and said to the herald, "Adjust the azimuth to the left by 1 degree. Yes, company commander," as the 5 cannons roared again. The right side of the Prussian infantry line, where it had been attacked, was swept by the whistling iron ball, and suddenly broken limbs were scattered all over the ground. Napoleon's company was very well trained. Joseph spared no expense, and had the gunners practice with a lot of live ammunition, and the gunners also had to take tutoring in mathematics, and those with excellent results were given extra allowances. Cannons. The rate of fire was extremely high and the stability was excellent. After 7 consecutive rounds of salvos, jagged gaps appeared clearly on the edge of the Prussian right wing point, although the soldiers did not dare to leave their posts without authorization under the orders of the officers. Some soldiers who had participated in the battle for the throne of Bavaria noticed the small bush nearby. They immediately suggested to the officer, "Sir, let's move closer over there, so the French gunners can't see us." "Yeah. Sir, that won't get us out of line. Those damn cannons are so accurate." The 3 company commanders near the shelling position immediately looked at each other with some emotion. Although they shouted to keep the soldiers in formation, they were actually bombarded by the artillery. Who knew whether the next artillery shell would hit them? To yourself. Soon, they made the decision to move the team slightly west. This does not violate the orders of superiors. When the direction of travel is difficult to pass, it is normal to move laterally for more than 10 meters. However, at the same time as their orders were issued, the sound of artillery was heard from Napoleon's side point. When the soldiers learned that the officer was leaning towards the bushes to block their sight, regardless of his movement limit of 10 meters, they almost leaned against the edge of the bushes with a huff. At the same time, the Prussian cavalry finally locked Napoleon's position, and then a cavalry squadron rushed straight towards him. To deal with this small-scale sneak attack by artillery, 150 cavalry are enough to clear it out. A French hussar quickly informed Napoleon of the movements of the Prussian cavalry, and urged him to move as soon as possible. But Napoleon looked at the growing gap in the Prussian infantry line in the telescope, but firmly said to the messenger, "Adjust the azimuth angle to the left by another 1 degree, and keep shooting rapidly." The soldiers of the artillery company immediately continued to load ammunition, facing the approaching Prussian cavalry, pouring artillery shells on the enemy infantry lines at the right end of the Prussian line. The soldiers gritted their teeth and complained. Although the shelling did not cause them to lose many people, everyone's feet invariably moved closer to the bushes in the infantry line. The Prussian soldiers who were originally side by side with them were not bombarded. Many people laughed at the guys hiding in embarrassment, but did not notice that the distance between them had widened to 7 or 8, 10 steps. Berthier had previously received a report from the commander of the artillery battalion. He was looking at the artillery position chosen by Captain Bauernaba with great interest, when he suddenly noticed that there was an obvious mark on the Prussian line formation gap. His heart suddenly moved, and he turned around and shouted to the herald, "Quick! Concentrate a battalion and attack the enemy's right wing. There is a gap there." "Yes, General." 10 minutes later, 5 infantry companies formed a charging column. Under the leadership of their respective company commanders, they rushed towards the right wing of the Prussian army to the beat of rapid drums. Napoleon had already led his artillery to withdraw from the temporary position. They almost persisted until the sound of the Prussian cavalry's hoofs had suppressed the sound of the artillery, and they fired the last shot. Before retreating, they came for a sneak attack, so they had no infantry cover, and had no choice but to retreat when facing the cavalry. Napoleon ordered the abandonment of the 5 cannons. He had already seen the enemy's line formation. As long as the Legion commander did not miss this opportunity, the loss of 5 guns was not worth mentioning. The Prussian cavalry saw the empty French artillery position, leaving more than 10 people to nail the gun doors, while others scattered around to search for the French artillery. Just now, Napoleon heard the increasingly clear sound of horse hooves behind him, and looked at his own position from a distance. He knew that it was impossible to rush back, so he had to shout to the soldiers of the company, "Everyone, stop! The Prussians are catching up." He waved his hands vigorously, but they will not face gunners who can be slaughtered at will, but warriors who dare to fight them to the last drop of blood. Now, Everyone pick up your percussion cap guns. Those without weapons, stand in the back row and help pass ammunition and cleaning rods. Let's let the Prussian cavalry have a taste of their power. To be honest, the soldiers of the Guards Corps were not very convinced by this Corsican company commander who came from the air and even had some rejection. It was only after seeing Napoleon's extraordinary ballistic calculation ability that they reluctantly accepted him. And today, this Corsican old hat led them to fight a beautiful surprise attack, bombing the Prussians and even messing up their formation point at this time. Seeing the fearless and heroic expression on the young face of the company commander, listening to his impassioned words, all of them were excited for a moment. And they responded loudly, "Yes, we must kill a few Prussian cavalry." Listen to the company commander. "Line up. Have you all forgotten how to line up? Come on, raise your guns. Remember to put on bayonets. Glory is waiting for us soon." Less than 40 gunners lined up in a straight line, nervously waiting for the Prussian cavalry to appear. It's not that they don't want to form a hollow square formation, but they don't have enough percussion guns. Napoleon drew his sword, stood solemnly at the right end of the queue, and silently said in his heart, "I really want to go back to my vineyard and see my mother working under the grape trellis. Provide you with a reading experience without wrong chapters and out of order chapters." This book is first published by Sitter, chapter 330, Successive Breakthroughs on the Front Battlefield. The Prussian cavalry also saw the French artillery trying to resist from a distance. All of them showed a sneer and began to slowly accelerate from 70 to 80 steps away. "Calm down. Don't shoot." Before Napoleon finished speaking, a soldier nervously pulled the trigger. They were all artillerymen, and although they were skilled in artillery firing, they had no experience in fighting the enemy within 200 steps. Others were affected and fired precious bullets. The scattered shooting, coupled with the long distance, did not cause any harm to the Prussians at all. Napoleon felt bitter, but he still encouraged his men loudly. "Don't be afraid, hold your guns tightly, and point your bayonets at people, not horses." The Prussian cavalry rushed to about 40 steps away, and when they saw the bright bayonet array, they immediately skillfully circled to the sides and rushed past the artillery defense line. They didn't need to fight these infantrymen desperately, as long as they relied on speed to pull back and forth a few times. The French formation would be messed up, and then they could chase and kill them at will like chasing rabbits. Napoleon frowned and ordered a turn, but at this time there were cavalry on both sides, and no matter how he turned, he couldn't defend them all. His mind was blank immediately. As an artillery officer, he was really not good at this. Free to fight. He waved his sword, ready to find a Prussian cavalryman for hand-to-hand combat, but suddenly remembered that as a Corsican, there was no need for him to fight for the battle between France and Prussia. He could surrender. Just as he was struggling in his heart, the Prussian cavalry had already lined up and rushed over. Napoleon raised his sword reflexively to cut the cavalryman in front, but heard a burst of gunfire from the rear of the Prussian cavalry, followed by the sound of dense horse hooves. The Prussians were obviously also startled and hurriedly abandoned the artillerymen who were not threatening, circled to the left, and assembled in an open field. Then, not far away, more than 100 cavalrymen dressed in gorgeous clothes and riding tall horses threw away their short-barreled guns and drew their sabers to attack them. "It's reinforcement." The gunners of the Guards Corps shouted excitedly. "We are saved. Haha, we don't have to die this time. Go ahead and teach those Prussian bastards a lesson." "Thank God, you really heard my prayer." Napoleon looked at the cavalry team and was a little surprised. He had heard the battalion commander mention that the cavalrymen of the Guards Corps were on the east side to guard against the Prussian cavalry. How could they come to rescue so quickly? The unprepared Prussian cavalry were not ready yet and were dispersed by the cavalry team that suddenly appeared and had to flee in embarrassment. Napoleon's soldiers became even more excited and they all loudly urged their cavalry to catch up and expand the victory. However, the cavalry team quickly turned back. When Napoleon saw the appearance of the leading officer, he was shocked. It was the captain of the personal guard of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, whom he had met at the last audience. Why would he come to save him? Queso reined in his horse not far from the artillery captain, turned over and got off the saddle, waved and said, "Fortunately, I caught up. Are you okay, Napoleon?" was startled, and then he realized that the other party was asking him, and hurriedly raised his hat and saluted. "Ah, I'm fine. Thank you so much. By the way, shouldn't you be guarding His Royal Highness the Crown Prince?" Quesode said unhappily. "It's because of your artillery company. His Royal Highness was worried that you would be in danger if you were so few and far away from the main force, so he asked me to come to reinforce. In fact, he was reluctant to come to save Napoleon before. After all, his duty was to protect the Crown Prince. However, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince said that if he didn't go, he would ride to rescue Captain Buvanaba himself. He had no choice but to lead the guard to reinforce this small team of artillery. Listening to the gunners around him shouting, "Long live His Royal Highness the Crown Prince," Napoleon saluted again seriously. "Thank you, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. He saved our lives." "You tell him yourself." Quesode gestured to the rear of the French army. "Now I have to send you back first." When Blücher noticed the eye-catching gap in his infantry line, he immediately broke out in a cold sweat. The main forces of the two armies were already close at hand. If the French attacked there at this time, it would mean that his right wing would be gone. He hurriedly transferred 4 squadrons of dragoons to block the gap. Although the name of the dragoons was cool, they were actually a group of infantry on horseback. They could use war horses to quickly reach their destination and then dismount to form a formation. When in a hurry, they can also be used to repair gaps in the line formation. However, just as they arrived near their own infantry line, the thing that Blücher was most worried about happened. The French attack column rushed to the face of the line array, and the target was obviously the gap. The formation of the infantry line is a very tedious thing. Although even children can stand in line, to stand in a straight horizontal line several kilometers long, it requires a large number of officers to coordinate continuously, and it takes a lot of time to complete. And the training level of the Prussian infantry is obviously not enough to quickly repair the gap in the line array. The 5 companies of the Guards Corps were almost not attacked. The Prussian soldiers who should have been in front of them leaned towards the bushes on the edge of the battlefield and had no time to return. So the 5 columns did not change their formation and inserted into the Prussian infantry line. The latter immediately fell into chaos. Most of the soldiers continued to move forward according to the previous decisive battle pace, while those near the gap hurriedly raised their guns to shoot at the French army on their side. And the entire line formation gradually turned into a diagonal line. A few minutes later, the drumbeats of the Guards Corps appeared 50 steps away from them. As thousands of percussion guns burst out a volley, 70 or 80 people in the Prussian infantry line immediately fell. When the chaotic Prussians began to fight back, less than 1/3 of the soldiers participated in the volley. The others were either fighting with the French army or too far away, and had not yet entered the effective range. The infantry of the Guards Corps quickly reloaded, and after advancing another 10 steps, they fired the second round of volleys. Berthier saw from a distance that the enemy's right wing had collapsed, and the protruding left wing was constantly shrinking back under the pressure of the Guards Corps, and he immediately and decisively ordered the entire army to charge in hand-to-hand combat. After the short trumpet sounded 3 times, the drummer immediately changed the drum beat and began to beat the military drum with the fastest beat. Under the command of the officers, the soldiers of the Guards Corps pulled their guns to waist height and pointed their bayonets forward. A few minutes later, the narrow infantry line shouted and rushed towards the Prussians, who had been in chaos after the previous volleys. At this time, they had no intention of engaging in battle. The officers took the lead and ran to the rear. The Guards Corps crossed the Prussian infantry line with a soaring momentum, leaving only corpses and trembling surrendered soldiers kneeling on the ground. Before Blücher's order for the 2nd Infantry Line to prepare for the enemy was issued, the 1st French column that broke into the gap rushed to the 2nd Prussian defense line without stopping and deployed in a horizontal column at a very fast speed. Then, they launched a round of volleys at the Prussian soldiers who were still confused. Although they were only 500 people, the Prussian soldiers heard the shouting in front of them and vaguely heard the officers say that the line formation in front of them had been broken through. At this time, they only thought that the main force of the French army had rushed in front of them. The fear magnified the casualties infinitely. When 500 soldiers of the Guards Corps launched the second round of volleys, the right wing of the Prussian infantry line, which did not suffer too many casualties, collapsed. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331, The Great Victory of Luxembourg. In large army operations, once there are successive collapses on the front, it will inevitably lead to huge chaos. Blücher personally commanded the 3rd Infantry Line and deployed all the reserves, but he still could not restore order to the soldiers at the front of the battlefield. Soon, a large number of broken Prussian troops, driven by the Guards Corps, turned and rushed towards their last line of defense. 69. The Prussian cannon, which originally occupied a good shooting position, could not find a target to attack when faced with the mixed French and Prussian soldiers. On the contrary, the cavalry artillery of the Guards Corps quickly maneuvered to a higher ground on the west side, and under the cover of the cavalry, began to bombard the Prussian infantry lines in the rear. Blücher looked at the Prussian soldiers scurrying around like ants whose nests were destroyed, and heard the deafening sound of French cannons in his ears. Knowing that this battle could no longer be fought, he bent the riding whip hard, with veins on the back of his hand, and said to the herald with difficulty, "Order Maximilian Company to command the infantry line and block the French here until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The artillery battalion remains to assist in the defense. At present, this infantry line is the only hope to hold back the French, and the artillery moves slowly, making it difficult to retreat smoothly." So he handed these over to Lieutenant Colonel Maximilian, who was good at defense, in an attempt to withdraw as many troops as possible. As long as they can retreat to Liege, they can join up with the southern Netherlands rebels there, reorganize their troops, and then persist until Potsdam sends reinforcement. Blücher knew that after this defeat, the Prussian army in the southern Netherlands would definitely be unable to challenge the French army head on in a short period of time, but this time it was just the French who suddenly appeared and caught him off guard. As long as he adds enough troops, and he devotes all his strength to commanding the battle, he will definitely defeat these damn French and wash away today's shame. He turned around and sighed, and finally waved his hand to the herald. The others immediately retreated to the town of Wensel. In addition, inform Altman and Dietlein to cancel the mission and head to Wensel as quickly as possible. Town. Yes, General. On the high ground 1.5 kilometers away in the southeast, Berthier received the report from the hussars, and immediately turned to Joseph and said, "Your Highness, the Prussians seem to be running away. If we invest our reserves to strengthen the frontal offensive, and cooperate with the cavalry to snipe from behind, it is very possible to break through the enemy's defense line before they withdraw from the battlefield. That is their last line of defense. In the current chaotic situation of the Prussian army, it is not a simple matter to retreat. Not to mention anything else, it would take at least 40 minutes just to convey the retreat order to every low-level officer." Then the officers gathered the troops and carried out the most basic team formation. It would be at least an hour and a half before they could move to Wensel. As for running directly without forming a team, that would not be a retreat, but a collapse. Most soldiers would eventually find a nearby village to live with. By the time he arrived in the town of Wensel, Blücher had 1,000 people in his hands. Even though he was usually pious, Jesus gave him special care. Joseph smiled and shook his head. "Oh, no, no, if you do this, you may capture Marquis Blücher." Berthier was about to say that would be great, but suddenly remembered His Highness's previous words about letting go, so he was stunned and hesitated. "What do you mean, let them go?" "That's right." Joseph smiled and looked at the Chief of General Staff. "As long as the Marquis doesn't stop, he will be France's best friend." Seeing Berthier's confused expression, Joseph simply told him his Dutch strategy. "We are not here to help Austria fight for free." He pointed to the northwest. "We will regain the Wallonia region through this war." "Well, that's right, it's recovery." Although France only ruled Wallonia for a few decades, since then Wallonia has always been French territory. He continued, but if our troops rashly enter the southern Netherlands, it will inevitably arouse strong opposition from Austria. Then, we need to have a good reason, such as Blücher's army raging in the southern Netherlands. After he briefly explained his plan for the southern Netherlands, Berthier's face was full of admiration and he nodded subconsciously. "You are really the best strategist, Your Highness. In this way, Joseph II Your Majesty will also be very grateful to France." "That's true." Joseph came to the map. "Now, you have to make arrangements for the final battle. The Prussian troops left behind must be eliminated as much as possible, while minimizing our casualties as much as possible." "Yes, Your Highness." Berthier immediately entered the state and quickly issued a series of orders based on the battlefield conditions. Blücher looked back at the dejected soldiers beside him, but he breathed a sigh of relief. The French army actually suspended the frontal attack just now, which allowed him to calmly collect the defeated troops and finally withdrew nearly 7,000 people. Now he has withdrawn to a place less than 4 kilometers away from Wenzel. If the two armies of Altman and Dietlein can return smoothly, then he will still have 14,000 troops in his hands, and there will still be a battle with the French. The power of a battle. These pampered Frenchmen, he sneered, probably were tired from the previous battles, so they stopped to wait for enough wine before continuing. So, they will never be able to defeat the Prussians with their strong willpower. As he was muttering to himself, he saw the staff officer urging his horse to come and report to him the results of the Hussars' reconnaissance during this period. "General, the French seem to want to bypass Lieutenant Colonel Maximilian. They went west from the villages of Racinbeau and Vallon, but left the cavalry where they were. Take a detour." Blücher sneered. "It will take an extra mile to pass through those 2 villages." As he spoke, he suddenly realized something and frowned. The French were not going to pursue him, but to surround Maximilian. He sighed helplessly. Maximilian was meant to be sacrificed. As long as Altman and Dietlein's corps returned safely, the loss would still be within an acceptable range. However, just as his thoughts raced, another messenger arrived and reported anxiously, "General, Lieutenant Colonel Altman was held back by Leo's Austrian army. The situation is critical. Please support me." "What? You mean Leo's army?" "On the battlefield 10 kilometers to the east, Lefebvre was commanding a thin infantry line to attack the Prussians' flanks, and Leo's soldiers, inspired by the Guards Corps, finally showed some momentum and were firing at the Back Horse Regiment." Chapter 332 Friends from the Southern Netherlands. Blücher was destined to be unable to send troops to reinforce the battlefield in the east, but the reinforcement of the Guards Corps arrived soon. Although there were only 3 cavalry companies, the new French troops joining the battlefield became the last straw that broke the camel's back. Murat shouted loudly to his exhausted horses to work harder, staring at the small group of Prussian soldiers in front of him. He was about to add a stroke to his military exploits, but he heard a Prussian officer shouting something in the distance. He didn't understand German very well, so he turned and looked at his comrades in the team, whose hometown was in the northeastern province. They surrendered. Seeing the latter swinging the saber in his hand, he shouted excitedly, "We defeated 5,000 Prussians." Soon, the cheers of the Guards Corps rang out throughout the battlefield area. With more than 2,000 soldiers and 1,600 Austrian remnants, they successfully killed the Prussian army that came to encircle them. It can be imagined that from now on, this army will have a huge psychological advantage when facing the Prussians again. Elite veterans rely on this accumulation of experience and confidence to eventually transform. However, Murat seemed a little unhappy. Although he had captured and killed 6 enemy soldiers, enough for him to win a medal, he still needed 4 enemies to fulfill his boast. At the same time, on the other side of the battlefield, the Guards Corps had completed the encirclement of Maximilian. Joseph was not in a hurry to let the troops launch an attack. Otherwise, after defeating the Prussian army here, if he did not move, it would seem a bit acting. Seeing that the Crown Prince was free at this time, Ixod came over and reminded him, "Your Highness, Captain Buwanaba is still waiting for you outside." "Oh, I almost forgot." Joseph patted his forehead. Please invite him in. Then, Napoleon, with black smoke on his face, was brought into the officer's tent. He quickly looked around at the people in the tent, and then raised his hat to Joseph and saluted. Your Highness, thank you for sending your personal guard to reinforce me. In fact, you saved the life of my entire artillery company. It's nothing. Joseph smiled and motioned him to sit on the chair, and then raised his hand to Emin. Please make a cup of tea for Captain Buonaba. He has made the greatest contribution today. Berthier echoed on the side. The artillery position selected by Captain Buonaba is simply exquisite. How did you notice it? The young emperor touched his nose shyly. I don't know why. I just feel that it can bring victory. It should be said to be an intuition. The officers in the tent all smiled, obviously thinking that the artillery company commander was relying on guessing. Only Joseph knew that Emperor now was definitely not a blind cat catching a dead mouse. His ability to select artillery positions is absolutely the best in Europe. In history, Napoleon repeatedly relied on the wonderful artillery positions to bring the artillery group tactics theory to the extreme, helping him win seemingly impossible victories again and again. And he brought the artillery group tactics to the Guards Corps in advance, which gave Napoleon the opportunity to use his talents. Joseph then looked at Berthier. Mr. Chief of Staff, I think that Captain Buonaba should be promoted to Major for his contribution in this battle. Right. In fact, he could directly promote Napoleon to Colonel, but Napoleon is still very young and needs to accumulate practical experience. In history, Napoleon was promoted too quickly, resulting in a weak foundation and even having to relearn military knowledge. So Joseph decided to let Napoleon personally experience every level of officer in the army and let him grow more steadily, which would only benefit him and not harm him. In addition, Corsican restorationism is still making a fuss at the moment. If Napoleon has too many military resources, they may be used to fund the Corsican rebels. Joseph sighed secretly. It seemed that the issue of Corsica's independence had to be put on the agenda, especially the Corsican restorationist leader Pascal Paoli. He didn't know if the intelligence bureau had made any progress. He had told them to keep an eye on this guy a few months ago. Berthier smiled and continued. Yes, Your Highness. I will sign the promotion documents for Major Buonaba as soon as possible. Oh, he should also receive a silver fleur-de-lis medal. Joseph looked at Napoleon, who was full of surprise, and told Berthier, I hope his battalion commander can take some time to go to his home in person to inform him of the good news of his medal and promotion. As you wish, Your Highness. The artillery battalion commander Lacoste unexpectedly received the benefit of a vacation in Corsica. Joseph and several staff officers were discussing Napoleon's wonderful artillery attack with him when a report sounded at the door of the tent. An officer walked in and said loudly, Your Highness, the Chief of the General Staff, the Prussian army has surrendered. Joseph looked at his pocket watch. It was only 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He had originally planned to rely on this Prussian army to delay until tomorrow, so that Blücher would definitely be able to escape back to Liege. Okay. He gestured to Berthier. I'll trouble you with a surrender. After he finished speaking, he suddenly remembered something and asked the staff officer next to him, Is there any news from Major Masson? Not yet, Your Highness. A few kilometers away, the battalion commander of the guards, Masson, looked at the trembling Dutch soldiers in the encirclement, put down his binoculars, yawned, and turned to ask the staff officer, Are they not here yet? Not yet, battalion commander. Masson shook his head. If it weren't for the order of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, these Dutch people would have become prisoners long ago. Soon, a hussar came running and signaled to him, Captain, there is a Dutch army approaching from the southwest, about 1,000 people. Mason immediately perked up and said to the staff officer, Finally they are here. The latter was a little surprised, but Liege is on the northwest side. Why are they coming from the south? Who knows? Mason spread out his military jacket and urged, Let everyone act seriously. This is a task ordered by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince himself. Yes, 2 kilometers away from Mason's troops, a middle-aged man wearing a South Netherlands military uniform, with a double chin and a hairline that has reached the top of his head, wiped his sweat, and said to the officer next to him, Major Acht, please launch an attack immediately. The muscular officer next to him was stunned. This deputy speaker Onk had been timid all the way before. He even ordered a detour of 4 miles to reinforce General Witt from the south because he heard the sound of artillery from afar at this time. Facing the French army that outnumbered him, he prepared to attack fearlessly. He naturally didn't know that Joseph sent someone to inform him that Onk could bring him here to reinforce the besieged Dutch army. Chapter 333 Wedge and Means of Disintegration. Encouraged by Deputy Chancellor Onk, the southern Netherlands rebels began to launch a fierce attack on the French who surrounded General Witt. Different from what they expected, the French army was almost defeated at the first touch. In less than 20 minutes, a huge gap appeared in the encirclement. Witt apparently also noticed something strange. When he vaguely saw the flag of the National Army of the South Netherlands in the telescope, he was immediately ecstatic and ordered the officers around him to cheer up and break out with him. Under attack from inside and outside, the Guards Corps led by Masson became increasingly unable to withstand, and the soldiers near the Dutch army fled with their heads in their hands. In less than an hour, Witt joined forces with Major Actor, who came for reinforcement. General Witt glanced at the French who were retreating in embarrassment, stepped forward to hug Actor, patted his back and said excitedly, "You came just in time, my dear friend. You just appeared suddenly on a cold snowy night. The first ray of dawn." The latter withdrew from his arms and signaled to Onk, who was not far away. "General, in fact, Speaker Onk is a real dawn. It was he who bravely defied all opinions and brought us to save you." "Wenk?" General Witt was startled. It was really difficult to associate that money-loving and irresponsible politician with bravery. But Actor should not lie to himself. Maybe all the bad things about Onk are just rumors. Thinking of this, Witt quickly straightened his military uniform, met Onk, and saluted with his chest carefully caressed. "You saved me and thousands of revolutionaries with your supreme courage. Please allow me to express my highest respect to you, and sincerely grateful." Onk returned the favor with a smile, took the horse pulled by the guard, and motioned for General Witt to sit on it. "Now is not the time for small talk. I heard that the French defeated General Blücher, and they may send more troops here at any time. Let's go back to Liege first." "You are right. The most important thing is to protect these revolutionaries." Witt got on his horse, found his staff in the crowd, and ordered the latter to assemble his troops and retreat toward Liege immediately. However, the French soon rallied to catch up. The soldiers of the Witt army, whose morale had been shattered by the Guards' army's cavalry artillery before, did not dare to accept the challenge. Each one ran faster than the other. In addition, their training was extremely low, and the marching column soon showed signs of collapse. While Witt was anxiously calming the soldiers loudly, Onk stood up again and expressed his willingness to lead a battalion to the rear. More than 20 minutes later, the Masson regiment of the Guards, which was in hot pursuit, exchanged fire with the more than 500 Dutch troops in front of them. After the two sides fought for half an hour, one of Onk's confidants slipped away to a small forest not far from the battlefield and met a French officer there. "Mr. Onk said, that's about it." The confidant said in French, as if he saw an acquaintance, "The next battlefield is near the village of Elivico. Please withdraw first." The French officer nodded. "Okay, see you in Elivico village." He was about to turn around, but stopped again, stared at the other party with sharp eyes and said, "His Royal Highness the Crown Prince asked me to remind Mr. Wenk not to forget the agreement." "Yes, yes. How could you forget this? Mr. Onk's reputation for trustworthiness is well known to everyone in Brussels. That's..." But, immediately, the French pursuers could not withstand the heroic soldiers of the southern Netherlands commanded by Onk, and began to retreat. Amid the roaring cheers of the soldiers, Onk began to lead his army to speed up to catch up with Witt's large army, and caught up with him before dark. In the next 2 days, Onk took the initiative to move to the rear twice more, and miraculously drove away the pursuers with his inferior force, allowing the Witt army to reach Liège safely. When Witt's soldiers joined the South Dutchmen who came to greet them, Onk's name immediately spread throughout Liège. The Dutch soldiers whom he saved from danger several times even gave him a nickname, Onk the Miracle Worker. Then as the injured soldiers returned to Brussels to rest, this nickname, together with Onk's deeds, quickly became known to all the southern Netherlands rebels in the southern Netherlands Parliament held the next day. The conservative members who had almost no say in the past appeared to be full of energy and spoke a little louder. and their opinions are obviously more valued by other MPs. This was all the political effect brought about by the conservative leader Henry Anke using his miraculous military performance to win huge support among the revolutionaries northwestern Luxembourg, the town of Winsel Point. When the guards arrived, Blücher's army had already left for a day and a half. In the building of the town trading center, Joseph was dictating a letter to his uncle Joseph. Second, while the clerk was recording it. Suddenly, Emin walked over quickly and whispered, "Your Highness, Major Masson is back." Joseph signaled the clerk to pause and said to Emin, "Please invite him in quickly." After a moment, the major, who was promoted from the Crown Prince's personal guard to the Guards Corps, entered the room under the leadership of Emin, caressed his chest and saluted Joseph. "Your Highness, the mission has been successfully completed." Joseph smiled and nodded. "You did a very good job. Thank you for your compliment." Masson added, "Your Highness, Henry Anke said that within 3 months at the earliest, the main force of the Southern Netherlands army will gradually withdraw from the south of Brussels. But he said that this requires some convincing. Only a member of parliament can do it, so you still need to provide 500,000 livres for funding. He really dares to ask for it." Joseph smiled and said to Emin, "Tell the intelligence bureau to bring 50,000 livres to Anke. Tell him to withdraw from Wallonia within 2 months. The area south of Brussels is roughly the scope of Wallonia." Masson said cautiously on the side, "Your Highness, if that Anke does not keep his promise, he dare not." Joseph shook his head calmly. He knows what the consequences will be if Van der Not receives the news that he is cooperating with us. Van der Not is the leader of the liberals in the southern Netherlands and Anke's political enemy. Historically, the liberals soon squeezed conservatives such as Anke out of parliament and began to monopolize power. Joseph continued, "Even if Anke really breaks his promise, it doesn't matter. As long as he continues to exist in the southern Netherlands parliament, my goal will be achieved." This is the biggest weakness of the so-called electoral system. He knew very well that with the current enthusiasm of the southern Netherlands rebels and the beginning signs of national awakening, it would be difficult for France to hold on to Wallonia Point. Even if it occupied it by force, it would face uprisings caused by revolutionaries everywhere. In that case, Wallonia would not only fail to bring benefits to France, but would become a serious bleeding point. Therefore, it was necessary to disintegrate the parliament of the southern Netherlands rebels, let them fall into internal friction, and then shift the attention of all revolutionaries to political struggles. Chapter 334, Grasping the Right Measure. The parliamentary election system in the southern Netherlands provides just such an opportunity. The conservatives of Anke had been suppressed by Van der Not before, and this time, with the help of the miracle of saving the Wit Corps, they returned to the parliament again. It can be predicted that the conservatives will have the strength to compete with the liberals with the support of General Witt and the soldiers of the southern Netherlands. And Anke will definitely avenge the previous exclusion, as long as Joseph takes out some resources to balance the two forces and fan the flames with public opinion. The southern Netherlands rebels will only have political fighting in the future. In the future, whether in the United States or Europe, as long as the power between the parties is close, they will fight to the death without incitement, let alone new players in the election game like Van der Not and Anke. Of course, there is a prerequisite for all this, that is, Austria, a powerful enemy that can promote the unity of the southern Netherlands, will no longer appear, and to achieve this, the Guards Corps still has a lot of drama to play. "What? You mean to chase after Blücher?" General Leo, commander of the Luxembourg front of Austria, looked at Berthier nervously, swallowed his saliva, and looked at Lefebvre beside him for help. "Do you think this is feasible?" He really hoped that his old friend who had fought side by side with him could help say a few words, even if it was just to say his troops have no combat effectiveness. However, Lefebvre said loudly with a serious face, "General Leo, I remember that His Majesty Joseph II issued an order to recover the entire southern Netherlands. Now that the Prussians and the Dutch rebels have just experienced a great defeat, it is a good opportunity for you to pursue the victory and recover the lost territory." Leo shook his head subconsciously, thinking that it was a victory you won. "Why should I pursue it?" Berthier stared at Leo exaggeratedly. "Are you afraid of fighting? Or do you intend to disobey the orders of your emperor?" "Ah, no." Leo shuddered and hurriedly raised his chest and head and said loudly, "Long live His Majesty the Emperor. Even if I die, I must recapture the southern Netherlands. I know you are the bravest general in Austria." Berthier patted his shoulder with a smile. "Don't worry, France is declaring war on the rebels in the southern Netherlands. If the southern Netherlands army shows up, I will fight with you." Leo was slightly relieved when he heard that the French would help and smiled. "I believe you should have made combat deployments, right?" Berthier nodded. "Tomorrow at noon, you can launch an attack on the Prussian position southeast of Liesen." "Tomorrow?" "Me, yes. The longer it takes, the more perfect the Prussians' defense preparations will be. I think it's better for you to attack as soon as possible." Joseph didn't know that, although he had tried his best to control the number of Prussian soldiers captured and killed to less than 4,000 in an attempt to reduce the presence of the French army, the battle in Luxembourg still caused a great shock in European countries. Political leaders of various countries were discussing that, although France and Austria had not formally formed an alliance and France had not declared war on Prussia, the current situation was developing in the direction of France and Austria joining forces to deal with Prussia. Potsdam, the administrative center of Prussia. And Southsea Palace. King William II, dressed in a grand manner, looked at the Hanoverian envoy in front of him with surprise. "I welcome the Governor General's suggestion to increase troops. So, how many more troops will Hanover prepare to send to Silesia?" "Oh, I will do my best to support them in terms of logistics." The Hanover envoy bowed and said, "Your Majesty, the Governor General will send another 30,000 troops according to Your Majesty's wishes. But the destination is not only Silesia, but also Luxembourg." William II was delighted. Together with the 12,000 soldiers sent by Hanover before, more than 40,000 Hanoverians will join the war. This will have a huge impact on the situation in Silesia. And he heard the word "Your Majesty." That means that the British are also very concerned about the war here. You know, the current elector of Hanover is still concurrently held by the King of England. Although it is an independent German state, it is actually a British enclave. With the strong support of the British allies, the possibility of winning has increased a lot. However, Luxembourg does not have too many interests in Prussia. If it were not for weakening Austria before, he would have transferred all the troops in the southern Netherlands back. But the British are very concerned about it because the French won a victory there? Or is it because of what Britain promised the Dutch? Thinking of this, William II said to the envoy, "You should know that the core of the current war is Silesia. If we can concentrate our forces to repel the Austrians, and even go deep into Bohemia, then whether it is the southern Netherlands or Luxembourg, the Dutch can easily capture it. I will definitely convey your advice to the governor." The envoy bowed slightly, "But before Your Majesty makes a decision, 20,000 Hanoverian troops will continue to rush to Luxembourg to assist General Blücher. The British don't care much about the war in Silesia, and even the Russians care more about it than them. After all, it is Germany's family affair." However, the French intervened in the direction of Luxembourg, and it is very close to France. If the French momentum cannot be curbed in time, it will be difficult for the insurgents in the southern Netherlands alone to stop the French army. Once the French reach the mouth of the Rhine River, it will cause a huge blow to British trade. So King George III of England quickly decided to use all the power of Hanover to reinforce the southern Netherlands. The British Parliament also quickly approved the aid allocation for the southern Netherlands. At the same time, the Dutch will also send an army of thousands of people to the southern Netherlands. Although the Dutch are reluctant to conflict with the French, merging with the southern Netherlands has always been their biggest dream. Once the French have the momentum to occupy the southern Netherlands, they will not hesitate to offend France to keep the homeland of the Netherlands. What's more, this time there is the support of the British behind them. Vienna. Schönbrunn Palace. Joseph II has been exhausted by the protracted war in Silesia. Austria's current financial situation is also not ideal. He has invested a lot of money in reforms in recent years. If the war is protracted, Austria is likely to be dragged down before Prussia. Fortunately, the news that the Prussian army in Luxembourg was defeated came this morning, which allowed him to breathe a breath of air in the ocean of anxiety. Leopold II stood by his bed, also smiling. "Your Majesty, the French stopped 2 miles from Liege. It seems that our sister knows how to keep a distance." According to the political tacit understanding between France and Austria. Luxembourg is paid by France, but the southern Netherlands will not be allowed to be touched by France. And the French are using practical actions to reassure Austria. Chapter 335 Louis XVI's Reward. Leopold II continued. According to the latest news sent back from the southern Netherlands, General Leo is launching a counterattack against Liege with the assistance of the French. At this time when the morale of Blücher's army is low, General Leo is likely to achieve good results. Joseph II nodded happily. Help me draft an order to commend Franz Sigmund Leo and also allocate an additional 4,000 troops to him. Maybe another military genius is about to appear in Austria. Austria's military strength is currently very tight, and the deployment of so many people shows His Majesty the Emperor's appreciation for Leo. While the two were talking, they saw Count Cornetz, the Minister of State, knocking on the door in a hurry and entering with a document in his hand. Leopold II saw his serious expression and asked in a deep voice, "What happened to Silesia?" "No, Your Majesty, the war situation in Silesia is still at a stalemate." Cornetz handed him the document. "The international situation has changed. Hanover has increased its troops by 30,000, and it is said that there will be more troops in the future." Leopold II's heart suddenly tightened. Hanover had previously sent more than 10,000 troops to Silesia. Adding these 30,000 troops was almost Hanover's entire force. If they want to continue to increase their troops, they will have to recruit on a large scale, which will inevitably have a considerable impact on their domestic farming and commerce. As Hanover was so desperate, there was only one possibility. The British decided to fully support Prussia. Cornetz continued from the side. "The only good thing at the moment is that our spies in Hanover confirmed that only 10,000 Hanover troops are to reinforce Silesia, and the rest will go to the southern Netherlands." At the same time, Prussia is also preparing to send 10,000 soldiers to Blücher. After William II met with Hanover's special envoy, he discussed with Prince Heinrich and decided to send additional troops to the southern Netherlands. Since he could not convince the British, it was better to cooperate with them and quickly eliminate the lowland areas, Austrian and French forces. At the same time, it can also prevent Fayot from taking advantage of the previous victory to recapture the southern Netherlands. According to their assumptions, there were 20,000 Hanovian troops plus Blücher's 14,000 troops, as well as several thousand southern Netherlands troops. If Blücher was sent an additional 10,000 troops, then there are nearly 50,000 troops in the direction of southern Netherlands, and Fayot didn't even have 25,000 soldiers there. With such a huge strength advantage, Luxembourg's French and Austrian armies can be defeated in at least 1 month. Then these 50,000 Hamburg troops will march to Silesia to establish victory in one fell swoop. Joseph II struggled to sit up straighter with pillows and said in a hoarse voice, "Fortunately, the British are very worried about the expansion of French power in the southern Netherlands." Leopold II continued, "Perhaps you can give General Leo more awards. His victory greatly reduced our pressure in Silesia." Joseph II nodded slightly. "We should send more troops to General Leo. France will probably increase its troops after the battle with Hanover. In this case, the southern Netherlands will be able to attract a large number of Prussian soldiers." Leopold II believed deeply and said, "And we will use this opportunity to recruit troops from across the country and achieve a decisive victory in Silesia." On the streets of Paris, countless citizens are taking to the streets spontaneously to celebrate the victory of the Royal Guards in Luxembourg. Since the failure of the 7 Years' War, the French have not won a victory against a European power for a long time. As for the American Revolutionary War, first of all, it was only France's civilian volunteer army, and the main force that won was the American Continental Army. And the French people didn't care much about it. But this time it was the French regular army that defeated the Prussian army head-on with inferior strength. This made the French feel that the Sun King of that year was coming back. You must know that the French at this time did not have the white flag skills of later generations, but were extremely martial. Victory in the war can even make them forget the trouble of not having bread for their next meal. At this point, only the Russians can compete with them. This is also the reason why Napoleon can easily seize power in a coup. regain power after being exiled, and easily gain the support of the whole country. He can win battles. Of course, there is also the element of Joseph letting the news media guide public opinion. Recently, major newspapers have been publishing the content of the Battle of Luxembourg. From His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's personal visit to the battlefield to command the army, to the performance of outstanding officers, to the heroic performance of specific soldiers, the topic quickly became full and people completely ignored the food shortage still hanging over France. At noon, the crowd celebrating the victory had arrived near the Palace of Versailles, and the Versailles commercial street ushered in another batch of hot sales. Queen Mary did not complain about her son going to a dangerous battlefield this time. She had become accustomed to it. Anyway, according to Archbishop Bryant, the Crown Prince was just tens of kilometers away from the battlefield to boost morale, and nothing unexpected would happen. She heard the noise coming from the square, and signaled to her maid, Count de Bernenac, please open the window. Yes, your majesty. The huge arched floor-to-ceiling windows were pushed open, and the cheers outside immediately reached Queen Mary's ears. Long live His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, the Son of God has brought us victory. Long live His Majesty the King. God bless France. March into the southern Netherlands and regain Wallonia. The Royal Guards Corps is invincible, and the glory belongs to you, Queen. Mary's face suddenly showed joy. Since she came to France, she had never seen such high public support for the royal family. And this was all brought about by her son's great victory. She hurriedly ordered the maid, order the guards to open the gate of the square and let people come in to celebrate. Oh, prepare some food for everyone, and a band. There must be music and dancing at this time. Yes, your majesty. The cheers of tens of thousands of people soon drowned the entire Versailles palace. Queen Mary took Louis XVI's arm, who came to the window after hearing the news, and asked loudly, should we give Joseph some rewards? Louis XVI also shouted loudly, to drown out the shouts in the square. Yes, then what do you think is a suitable reward? I hope it is a beautiful and kind wife. You are awarding the lucky princess. Louis XVI laughed, thought for a while, and said loudly, why not build a statue for our son of God in the square of Versailles? Just as the Hanoverian and Prussian coalition forces rushed to Luxembourg, Tipu Sultan, the leader of Mysore, was also reviewing his army in the distant southern part of the Indian peninsula. It was a powerful army of 60,000 people equipped with Cholville or Brown Bess flintlock rifles, lined up in neat European-style formations. Chapter 336 Poaching the British. Tipu Sultan flicked the reins of his horse and passed quickly in front of the soldiers. The soldiers beside him immediately performed a gun salute and looked at him with respect. Lord Jahangir, do you think my army can defeat the British? Tipu Sultan turned to ask the fat little old man riding a horse behind him. Of course, great Sultan. The old man named Jahangir raised his wide sleeves and bowed slightly. Your army is unrivaled, and no one can be your opponent. He paused, glanced at Tipu Sultan's face, and continued, however, the British have sophisticated weapons, and have warships to cooperate along the coast. If you become enemies with them, your army will also suffer considerable losses. Moreover, we have to rely on trade with the British to obtain the gold coins you need to implement reforms. Tipu Sultan nodded slightly. This Jahangir was an important minister whom he had relied on very much since his father's time, so his opinions could not be ignored. So, you think I should get rid of those Frenchmen? That's not necessary. Jahangir took 2 steps forward and whispered, they have brought a lot of weapons and technologies, and you can use these to do what you want. As for them wanting to use your power to deal with the British, we just need to keep perfunctory. The most important thing for us right now is to teach Travancore a lesson with a force as powerful as shaking mountains and seas, so that other countries will be frightened and will not dare to be enemies with us again. The British will definitely choose to cooperate with us after seeing our strength. Tipu Sultan nodded, raised his hand, and pointed southward with his riding crop. Then we will march to Travancore early next month. As for the French, it is up to you to entertain them. Yes, great Sultan. In a luxurious building in the southern part of Mysore, Lafayette was pacing back and forth anxiously. He had been in India for a month, and had repeatedly suggested to Tipu Sultan to attack the British. He had even formulated a battle plan, but the stubborn Mysore leader never agreed. He was here every day except for banquets, and was invited to guide the army training, but there was no hope of completing the crown prince's plan. And his own meteoric rise will also come to nothing. Lafayette suddenly stopped, gestured to the servant to get his coat, and then said to the attendant, "Go and ask for Mr. Salah." "Yes, General, soon." A man in his 30s, wearing an Arabic robe and a neatly trimmed beard, came outside his house. He stroked his chest and saluted him, and said in French with a North African accent, "General, are you looking for me?" "Yes. Please come with me to Ambervilla Palace. I have to convince him." Lafayette strode towards the carriage in the courtyard. "It will be the rainy season soon, and it will be impossible to proceed at that time." Massive battle. Salah. Caught up. "General, you have talked to Tipu Sultan 5 times, and it seems difficult for him to accept your opinion." "It's that old guy named Jahangir." Lafayette jumped into the car and said angrily, "Every time I talk about the importance of defeating the British, he will say something like the British are just here to do business. They have no ill will towards Mysore to interrupt. Also, the previous wars were all because of trade disputes." Salah added, "He is indeed a problem. As far as I know, there are many pro-British forces in Mysore, and Jahangir is their representative figure." The carriage started slowly, and Lafayette's eyes suddenly turned cold. "Perhaps I really should ask the intelligence bureau for help to make that guy disappear completely." No, that's too risky." Salah said, "Maybe you forgot the instructions His Royal Highness the Crown Prince gave you before leaving. I think it's time to try those methods now." "Crown Prince?" Lafayette immediately shook his head. Those special methods of the Crown Prince were simply a joke. What about telling stories to the people of Mysore, putting labels on those who oppose, using myths to guide the direction of public opinion in Mysore, even marrying Tipu Sultan?" Salah tried. "If you need to be busy negotiating with Tipu Sultan, let me implement these measures of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. What do you think?" Lafayette scratched his hair in frustration and said absently, "Whatever you want." When Lafayette came out of Tipu Sultan's palace dejectedly an hour later, Salah did not return to the post house with him, but turned to the west of the city. With the help of the intelligence bureau, Salah, the second French consul in Mysore, successfully met the General Sheikh Khan of Mysore. Although the intelligence bureau had only been in Mysore for less than a month, it quickly established a usable intelligence network by relying on the former employees of the French East India Company it brought. It has even extended its tentacles to several princely states outside Mysore. As a Muslim from Tunisia, Salah had a good conversation with General Sheikh Khan, who knew French. The latter served as a member of Tipu Sultan's military reform and went to Europe to learn military technology. He learned French in the Ottomans. "You are right. Jahangir must have received benefits from the British." Sheikh Khan, who was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, looked at Salah and nodded. "But His Majesty the Sultan trusts him very much, and we can't even criticize him in front of the Sultan." The reason why Salah came to Sheikh Khan was because this man was Jahangir's political opponent. Salah smiled and said, "You can definitely let other people come against him." "Other people? For example, small nobles, or even ordinary people?" "I do not understand what you mean. Since Jahangir is pro-British, then we will make the British lose their hearts." Salah and Sheikh Khan continued their discussions until 5 p.m, and then they were about to get up and leave. Before leaving, he seemed to suddenly remember something, and said to the latter, "I wonder if His Majesty the Sultan intends to marry France?" Sheikh Khan immediately showed ecstasy when he heard this, and nodded vigorously without hesitation. "You know, Tipu Sultan has been learning from Europe since his father's generation in order to strengthen Mysore. As he continued to contact Europe and learned about the advancement of the West, he inevitably developed a strong admiration for the European powers. Simply put, it is Jingao. Tipu Sultan himself spoke English, French and Turkish. It's just that the European powers were extremely indifferent to him, a native of the Far East and a pagan at the same time. In the end, he had to settle for the next best thing and climb the Ottoman line. Therefore, Mysor's military training system basically learned from the Ottoman New Army, and also learned a little from people from the British and French East India Company during the period. At present, France, as the top power in Europe, has expressed its intention to marry Tipu Sultan. How could he not be ecstatic? But Sheikh Khan immediately thought of a serious question. Mr. Consul, if you get married, do you need to change your religion? Conversion means to change one's religious beliefs. Mysore is Islamic or Hindu, while France is Catholic. If there is a marriage, one of the spouses must convert. Salah smiled and shook his head. Of course not, General. Mysore can marry an Islamic princess. Chapter 337 Betrothal Gift and Dowry. Ambavira Palace, Mysore City. It was originally the palace of Maharaja, the ruler of the kingdom of Mysore, but now most of it has been requisitioned by Tipu Sultan. In a spacious and cool hall on the west side of the palace, Tipu Sultan couldn't hide his excitement and grabbed Sheikh Khan. You mean, France is going to marry a princess to Mysore? According to the arrangement of Salah, the second French consul in Mysore, he did not come to Tipu directly to tell him about the matter, but asked Sheikh Khan to tell Tipu. This will allow Sheikh Khan to become the de facto facilitator of the marriage between France and May, greatly improve his political status, and provide convenience for future joint efforts to bring down the pro-British Jahanzeb. Indeed, the great Sultan. Sheikh Khan sat up straight and stroked his chest. And she is also a princess who believes in Islam. Tipu Sultan was stunned when he heard this. He is relatively familiar with European countries. France is considered the backbone of European Catholicism. How could a princess who believes in Islam appear in the royal family? Sheikh Khan noticed his doubts and hurriedly repeated Salah's original words. Your Majesty, the French consul said that this princess is from Tunisia. Her name is Amira Slich, and she is 15 years old. Beautiful, and intelligent. Tunisia. Tipu Sultan blinked and then remembered the news not long ago. Tunisia has been annexed to France. How can a Tunisian be a princess? Sheikh Khan continued to explain in Salah's words. Your Majesty, although Tunisia merged with France, it still belongs to the same kingdom. Princess Amira's brother is the Tunisian Bey. Oh, it has now been renamed the Duke of Tunisia. Tipu Sultan could not help but nodded slightly. He knew that this was common in Europe. For example, in the Holy Roman Empire, their states have a common HRE emperor, but the states below also have their own grand dukes, and their children and sisters are also princesses. But even with the princess from Tunisia, he was very satisfied, because she was a princess from a French state. Looking at the entire peninsula, no one could marry a major European country. This will greatly increase Mysore's reputation and become the first-class kingdom on the peninsula. Is the princess 15 years old? He thought. Prince Pratibha happens to be 17 years old. Let them. Sheikh Khan, however, had a proud smile on his face and interrupted him rudely. Your Majesty, what the French consul means is that Princess Amira wants to marry His Highness Nawaz. Tipu Sultan's eyes widened instantly, because Nawaz was his son. Although Tipu has the final say in Mysore now, there is actually a Maharaja above him, who is the supreme ruler of Mysore. Tipu's father Haider was originally an officer in Mysore. After taking complete control of the army 30 years ago, he deposed the king of the Wadia family and gained real power in Mysore. The Wadia family became India's food giant in the 21st century. They also manipulated legal provisions in their cooperation with the French Danone group, sued Danone, and ultimately robbed Danone of $2.4 billion. At present, the nominal rulers of Mysore are still the Wadia family, so Tipu has always believed that France is going to marry the Wadia family. But he didn't expect that the French would choose him. This means that the French government believes that it is the ruler of Mysore, at least in the future. With the support of France, it is possible for him to completely throw the Wadia family into the trash. He looked at Sheikh Khan excitedly and was about to express his agreement, but suddenly remembered that the French were asking him to deal with the British, and he suddenly became a little depressed. Although he also hates the British are indeed powerful and have the support of Maratha and Hyderabad. He really does not want to provoke the British point. Sheikh Khan saw his hesitation and hurriedly threw out the cake given by Salah. The French consul also said that Princess Amira's dowry was an artillery production factory with at least 30 technicians and complete production equipment. Tipu Sultan's breathing suddenly became rapid. This is not an artillery piece, but an artillery factory. He had been learning how to cast cannons from Europe, and even spent a lot of money to hire European craftsmen to make some cannons. However, the quality and power of those cannons were far inferior to the original ones bought in Europe. There are two main reasons for this. One is that Misor learned from Ottoman, and the latter himself was a bit jealous. His artillery technology had lagged behind Europe for many years. If he taught it to Misor, he would have to give it a discount. The second reason is that cannon casting is a systematic project. You can't just get a blueprint and add a few craftsmen to create a sophisticated cannon. From the most basic processing tools, such as rulers and pliers, to advanced processing equipment, such as boring machines and drills, Misor is very different. Don't underestimate a pair of pliers. Without a strong handicraft foundation, you still can't make a qualified one. Therefore, the cannons Misor relies on most so far are the dozen or so cannons smuggled from Europe, and it has processed nearly 100 of them itself, for a total of no more than 120 cannons. Although these guns were enough to stand out from the rest on the Indian peninsula, they were still far from enough when facing the British point. But now the French directly provide a complete set of production equipment, plus dozens of skilled technicians. From now on, Tipu Sultan can continuously obtain cannons, as long as he invests money. He has more than 10 times the number of soldiers as the British. If he has enough cannons, he may be able to defeat the British. Of course, Joseph still has a trick up his sleeve. Although Misor has obtained the artillery factory, it has to rely on France for both raw materials and spare parts. Even the most basic gunpowder is not something that Indians can easily get. Without the fine chemical industry, the power of gunpowder is at least 10% or 20% lower, and arming Misor will not do any harm to France. After all, this is the sphere of influence of the British. With the political environment in India, there are many small states, sharp religious and ethnic conflicts, and the caste system. There is no need to worry that Misor will unify the peninsula and form a powerful empire. Tipu Sultan immediately stopped hesitating and stood up to Sheikh Khan and said, "Invite the French consul to the Ambori Palace tomorrow. I want to discuss the marriage with him." He remembered something and ordered, "You can tell the consul that I'm willing to pay £500,000 as a betrothal gift." Of course, the betrothal gift he mentioned is not exactly the same as the betrothal gift in East Asia, but it is generally the money paid for marrying a wife. Joseph never expected that he would get a huge profit of more than 12 million livres out of thin air in order to instigate Misor to deal with the British. But this is enough to show how rich the Indian peninsula was at that time and how much profit Britain, which controlled the India-Europe trade, made from it. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338, Novice in Public Opinion Warfare. Providing you with a reading experience with no wrong chapters and no disordered chapters. The marriage between Misor and France came too suddenly, surprising everyone involved. This also includes Marquis Lafayette. Coming out of the Amboila Palace, he looked at Salah, his tone full of confusion and surprise. "You actually want to promote a marriage with the natives?" Salah also smiled politely. "This is the bargaining chip left by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince for us, and of course we have to throw it out when necessary. You yourself said that the rainy season is coming. Besides, this is just the marriage between Haji Bey, oh no, Duke Haji and the Kingdom of Misor, and it has no impact on the royal family. According to the secret agreement between the two parties just now, the marriage will not be made public before the British withdraw from the Indian peninsula. Only a secret wedding will be held, and the dowry will be delivered. This will not affect Anglo-French diplomacy in the short term. Oh, and the £600,000 betrothal gift. This money is enough for you to bring 2 regiments from France to participate in the war here. Yes, Salah used his eloquence to persuade Tipu Sultan to add another £100,000 of betrothal gifts during the discussion of the marriage just now. It's up to you. Lafayette had no interest in these political operations and still looked anxious, but Tipu has not responded to what I said about attacking the British. Your marriage plan doesn't seem to have any effect. This is just part of the plan. Salah followed him into the carriage, closed the door, and continued. It makes our relationship with Mysore closer, and at the same time we have gained an important ally, General Sheikh Khan. By the way, Marquis, I need to apply for 100,000 livres of funding from you. As the main person in charge of the Indian strategy, Lafayette is in full charge of the troops and finances. This time, Joseph allocated 700,000 livres of funding to him. What do you need so much money for? Lafayette looked at his Tunisian colleague in surprise. If the latter was not a disciple of Elder Alaei, with a prominent status and a huge family power, he would have suspected that Salah wanted to run away with the money to deal with those Mysore officials who speak for the British. Salah said, such as Jahanzeb, although it is cheaper to hire people in Mysore. You know, there are no newspapers here. Oh, even if there are, it's useless. Most people here are illiterate, so if you want to carry out some propaganda, the cost will be very high. I can only hire a lot of people and use their mouths to spread the news. Propaganda? What do you want to promote? Well, in the words of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, this is called a war of public opinion. Salah still smiled. To put the pro-British guys in trouble, then General Sheikh Khan will deal a fatal blow to them. Lafayette had no other way to persuade Tipu Sultan at the moment. After thinking for a moment, he could only nod. Okay, I hope you can succeed. But you need to write a report every day and give it to me on the flow of funds. You will see the daily financial report, Marquis, soon. With Mysore as the center, some stories about the British began to spread to cities such as Seringapatam and Gangu. Point with the connections and resources of General Sheikh Khan, the news spread very quickly. In fact, Salah only spent 1/3 of the applied funds. In order to overthrow Jahanzeb's forces more quickly, Sheikh Khan, as an ally, paid £5,000 from his own pocket, equivalent to more than 100,000 livres, and mobilized many nobles of the same political faction to help. Point on the streets of Seringapatam, a dozen Hindu citizens were gathering together, talking about something excitedly. My relatives in the Amboila Palace heard those generals say that more than 3 million people died at that time. But most of them are from Madurai, so we can't feel it here. The British killed so many people. Don't you know this? This is to scare us. A small man with fair skin and wearing a red short robe continued mysteriously. Have you heard about it? In order to control North America, a very remote land, the British killed all the Indians they could see. That is, the people who originally lived there. There were tens of millions of them. Yes, I heard about this. A middle-aged man nodded. My business partner has been to North America, and he told me about what happened there. The British would trick the Indian leaders into a room, saying that they wanted to discuss something, and then set fire to them all. Oh, they would also give blankets used by plague patients to the Indians, causing a village to be infected with the plague and die. I heard that the British are preparing to attack Mysore. What happened to the Indians, they will do to us. A man stroked his chest with lingering fear and said, fortunately, there is Tipu's army. Otherwise more than 3 million people would have died in the 2 wars with the British. Maybe even we will. Another old man added nervously. I also heard that the British like to eat children, especially high caste children, who are clean and meaty. They only eat limbs and hearts, and throw the rest to feed dogs. The people around were immediately horrified. Although they were not high caste, their children were white and plump. If the British attacked this time, the children would probably die tragically on the dining table. What they were talking about was, of course, the script written by Salah and the accompanying writers. It was just that Joseph didn't know much about the specific situation in Mysore before, so he only roughly talked about the ideas of the public opinion war, and left the rest to the executors of the Indian project to act according to circumstances. As a novice, Salah finally made up such a thrilling thing. However, He understood the principle of 8 parts true and 2 parts false mentioned by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. The psychological shadow left by the 2 previous missile wars on the locals was used as a starting point. Most of the content was what the British really did, but the numbers were slightly exaggerated. For example, the war between Mysore and Britain killed less than 130,000 people in total. There were far fewer than tens of millions of Indians who were massacred. Of course, eating children was something he attributed to the British, based on the horror stories he heard when he was young, which fell into the category of 2 parts false. Since the Indians have extremely limited sources of information, it is difficult for anyone to verify the truth or falsehood of this. Salah, who sent out a large number of water troops, quickly gained the right to speak during this period. At the same time, in Madurai in the south, people were talking about the same topic and joined the British in selling slaves in large quantities because it was close to the sea. Everyone began to worry that they would be sold to America to work day and night as coolies like the Africans in more places. The news that the British would ban Hinduism and Islam in Mysore, force everyone to convert to Protestantism, and those who disobeyed would be shot, caused a greater panic. For a time, the memories of the first 2 Mysore wars, coupled with the news about the British, filled the hearts of every Mysorean with hatred and fear of the British. All it took was a spark to ignite the gunpowder barrel. Chapter 339. Want to refute rumors? Let me help you. Tens of kilometers west of Mysore city. This is close to the Kannauр area, controlled by the British. At this time, in a luxurious building with a more iron-era style, Callum Griffiths, a senior representative of the British East India Company, was looking at Jahanzeb in front of him with a dark face. "Are you sure these were done by the French?" "Well, I have no evidence, Mr. Griffiths," Sudan's private secretary, Jahanzeb, said. "No evidence," but his tone was quite firm. "These rumors all appeared after the French came to Mysore. According to reports, I know that the French have been secretly encouraging the Sultan to attack British territory. The Prime Minister of Mysore, also known as the Vizir, is only a ceremonial official position. Above the 4 core ministers of real power, and below the Sultan, there is also the position of the Sultan's secretary, which has very heavy authority. However, even such an important minister hooked up with the British after the Second Mysore War, and used the power of the British to consolidate his position. Griffith was not surprised when he heard this. In India, Britain and France have never stopped stabbing each other in the back. But since the 7 Years' War, French forces basically withdrew from India, and they have never caused such a big scene again. It stands to reason that the Indian peninsula no longer has French interests. With France's current financial situation on the verge of bankruptcy, they should not invest so much here. However, Griffiths still ordered Jahanzeb in a cautious manner. "I hope these rumors will disappear within a month. If you can help it, buy half a boatload of cheap fabrics or ironwork from me." British textiles and ironware are very popular in India. If you can get half a shipload of goods at a low price, you can sell them at almost double the price, making a profit of at least £20,000 to £30,000. Jahanzeb was overjoyed. He immediately flipped his wrist and said with a serious expression, "Dear representative, I promise that you will not hear those rumors tomorrow morning." When he returned to Mysore, he immediately ordered through the administrative system to arrest those who spread rumors and slandered the British across the country. In Sheikh Khan's summer residence, several Mysore officials who were of the same faction as Sheikh Khan looked at Salah anxiously. They had already received the news. Jahanzeb ordered a large-scale arrest of those who spread rumors. In just 3 or 4 days, thousands of people had been thrown into prison, many of whom were sent by them. The most troublesome thing is that what Jahanzeb did this time was reasonable: to eliminate rumors. Even if they went to the Sultan, they would not be able to tell Jahanzeb's fault. After a long while, Athinumda, a senior officer of Mysore, said with a sullen face, "There are not many people who dare to talk about the British these days. Even when I sent my men to spread the news, no one dared to listen." Another person nodded immediately. "If this trend continues, things about the British will soon be forgotten by everyone." Moreover, Jahanzeb will also enhance his authority due to the large-scale transfer of officials. Sheikh Khan sighed and said to Salah, "Mr. Consul, it seems that we need to find another way to deal with Jahanzeb." The Latter had been thinking with his head down before, but now he raised his head with a smile on his face. Your Majesty General, do you still remember why we spread the story about the British? Of course it is to arouse people's hatred for Britain, so as to bring down the pro-British Jahanzeb and others. That's right. Salah nodded. Actually, people's hatred of Britain cannot directly affect the pro-British faction. There is still something needed to ignite public opinion, and now, Jahanzeb's arrest of the rumormongers is giving us this opportunity. Sheikh Khan and others looked at each other, and then looked at Salah. What are you going to do? Send more people to spread the news? No, we are helping Jahanzeb catch the rumormongers. Salah made a grabbing motion with his hands, and said in a stern voice, catch him harder than him, to make everyone start to fear. A few days later, the Mysore military also began to respond to Jahanzeb's order and arrest people spreading rumors about the British across the country. Their arrest standards were more stringent than those of administrative officials. As long as someone accused someone of saying bad things about the British, the soldiers would immediately come to arrest them in the name of executing the orders of the Sudanese secretary, especially in the two political and economic centers of Mysore and Selingabad. Tens of thousands of people have been imprisoned. The prison that could only hold more than 100 people was now packed with thousands of people. Then even the barracks were crowded with prisoners at first. Jahanzeb thought this was the military trying to show favor to him, and happily sent people to reward the soldiers who caught the rumormongers. This made people more certain that it was the Sudanese secretary who was mobilizing the army to arrest the people. So in addition to the British, Jahanzeb was also added to the story of the war of public opinion. But Jahanzeb soon realized that something was wrong. These military guys were so crazy that one of his wife's relatives was arrested because the latter didn't object when she heard someone talking about the British in the street. At the moment, everyone in Mysore is in danger and dare not even go out, fearing that if someone talks about the British when they meet on the street, they will be in trouble soon. At the same time, people's hatred of the British has become stronger. People are like this. The more you don't let them say anything, the more they will believe it. Soon after, even Tipu Sultan was alarmed and summoned Jahanzeb to discuss the mass arrests. The latter knew that the matter was too big, so after explaining the rumor, he immediately told the Sultan that he would identify the arrested people as soon as possible and release them immediately, as long as they were not particularly serious rumormongers. Sheikh Khan's political circle then held a meeting. Jahanzeb was reprimanded by the Sultan and had to start releasing people. The Thinumda seemed very happy. This will be a big blow to his prestige. Another person nodded and said, after this lesson, he will definitely not dare to arrest people at will in the future. We can continue to send people to tell those stories about Britain. Several people remembered that this was Salah's clever plan and turned to look at him. Just as they were about to flatter him, they saw Salah said seriously, the day after tomorrow morning, Jahanzeb will release the first batch of arrested rumormongers. This is our best opportunity. We must seize it firmly. Our opportunity. Salah looked at Sheikh Khan. Please mobilize all the manpower, send them to all parts of the country, and make preparations in advance. Wait until noon the day after tomorrow, and launch at the same time. Chapter 340 Conflicts intensify. After Salah told several Mysore officials about his plan and made adjustments to the details, he rushed back to his post house to report the operation to Lafayette. After he left, Sheikh Khan looked at the back of his carriage and said to the people beside him, if everything goes well this time, Jahanzeb will be sent to hell. The thin officer hesitated and continued, but it doesn't seem to be safe enough to just kidnap those who are about to be released. Sheikh Khan's eyes flashed with a sneer. These Europeans are indeed smart, but they are not decisive enough. We must act in our own way to ensure that Jahanzeb does not have any chance to turn the tables. What do you mean, we do this? The other people nodded in succession when they heard it. The next day. In the southeast suburbs of Mysore city. In the open space outside the largest prison in the city, 4,000 or 5,000 people gathered, all looking forward to the prison gate behind more than a dozen guards. Today is a day when the government announced the release of arrested rumormongers, and the number of people released is as high as 370. This made the people of Mysore, who have been suppressed by panic for some time, breathe a sigh of relief. In addition to the families of the released people, more people want to witness the release process with their own eyes. After being reprimanded by Tipu Sultan in person, Jahanzeb has ordered to stop arresting rumor mongers. After this round of severe crackdown on rumors, he believes that, even if he stops arresting people, no one dares to talk about the British casually. However, the efficiency of the administrative system is much lower. This time, his order was only strictly implemented in Mysore and Seringapatam, and the army was still arresting rumor mongers in more distant areas. Jahanzeb hopes that the demonstration effect of releasing the arrested people this time will allow the whole country to receive the message that the rumor incident has passed, so that the storm will subside. Not long after, the sun has risen to the center of the sky. Under the eager gaze of thousands of people, the prison gate has not been opened for a long time, but the number of guards at the door has increased a lot. I knew they were lying to us. Sheikh Khan's men, who were planted in the crowd, shouted as planned. The arrests are not over at all. We are still in danger. I heard that the devil asked the officials to arrest people in large numbers. Without the devil's apostrophe consent, they would never release anyone. Another person echoed loudly. In recent times, since British has become a taboo word, everyone secretly uses devil to refer to the British. The crowd immediately became agitated, shouting one after another, "Open the door, they are innocent. The child's father has been arrested for half a month. If he doesn't come back, the family will not be able to survive. Please, release them. Didn't the official promise it?" At this moment, a young man suddenly slipped out of the small door on the side of the prison, walked quickly to the front of the crowd, and shouted hoarsely, "No one will be released at all. Dead. They are all dead." This person was naturally arranged by Sheikh Khan. Another tug immediately followed up. "Who did you say died?" The young man's face was full of fear, and he pointed to the prison behind him. "Those who are about to be released. They were all killed. I saw it with my own eyes." His words were like cold water falling into boiling oil, and thousands of people boomed and exploded, especially the families of those scheduled to be released. Many women collapsed on the ground and cried. A middle-aged man of a high caste stood up and pointed at the young man and said, "If you lie, I will put you in prison too." I didn't lie. Those bodies were placed on the open ground of the prison. The middle-aged man frowned and waved vigorously to the crowd behind him. "Let's go. Let's go in and take a look." Thousands of people immediately responded loudly, and under the leadership of dozens of high castes, they rushed to the prison like a flood. The prison guard only threatened symbolically, and then wisely avoided the crowd. The agile people quickly climbed up the wall, and then flexibly climbed over several large trees, and came to the building inside the prison. Then they pointed to the courtyard inside the building and screamed, "They are really dead. There are hundreds of corpses. The devil killed them. These cursed guys. They killed hundreds of people." The people outside the prison were completely blown up. Since the first batch of people released were people of some status, their relatives and friends were not vegetarians either. Soon someone opened the prison gate and thousands of people rushed into the prison. What appeared in front of them was an unbearable scene. More than 300 corpses were casually placed on the ground, like slaughtered livestock. The hot weather made the air full of stench, and a large group of flies hovered over the corpses like black clouds, making a buzzing cheer. There were more than a dozen prison guards nearby who were hurriedly wrapping the corpses with straw, but because there were too many dead bodies, they couldn't even finish dealing with a corner. Women rushed into the yard with their children, distinguishing their relatives among the piles of corpses. Sharp cries were heard incessantly, and from time to time someone fainted. What followed was a deafening curse. Some high caste leaders took several prison officials out. Under questioning from thousands of people, an official said tremblingly, "Yesterday they were all fine, but this morning they suddenly started vomiting and bleeding from their eyes and nose. Before I could call a doctor, they all died." The middle-aged man from a high caste asked, "Are they all the ones to be released today?" The prison officer nodded. "Besides them, who else died?" "No, no more." Someone in the crowd shouted. It was the devil who asked the Sudanese secretary to order them to be killed. "Yes, it must be him." Someone immediately echoed. "He wanted to threaten us with the death of these people." The Devils killed hundreds of people in order to prevent us from talking about their evil deeds. The Sudanese secretary is an accomplice of the devil. We want justice for the dead. Let's go. Let's complain to the Sultan. We accuse the Maharaja of their evil deeds. Led by a group of upper caste people, the angry people escorted several prison officials towards the Ambabala Palace. The news spread quickly, and more people joined the procession of complaining to the Sultan along the way. Of course, this was all the result of Sheikh Khan's men fanning the flames and going door to door to publicize the massacre of freed persons. When Tipu Sultan saw the dark crowd gathering around the palace, he almost thought someone was about to cause a riot. It was not until an official from Sheikh Khan's faction came to report the situation that he was relieved. Chapter 341 Losers only deserve a good burial. In a luxurious building in the east of Mysore, Salah stared at Sheikh Khan with wide eyes and lowered his voice. How come more than 300 people died? It's said to be poisoning. Sheikh Khan flipped his wrist nonchalantly. It's not surprising that the food in the prison killed people. Salah took a step forward, his voice trembling. Did you do it? Well, maybe. 69. Salah said angrily. I just asked you to kidnap them halfway. Why did you kill them all? Oh, not all, Your Excellency the Consul. Sheikh Khan handed him an exquisite ivory pipe. How many puffs would you like? There are still more than a dozen people who did not have dinner yesterday, so they are not dead. Salah flicked the pipe away. Sheikh Khan did not feel dissatisfied and smiled. You have to know that to kidnap those hundreds of people, we need to mobilize an army of at least 300 people. If only one of them leaks the secret, we will be in big trouble. To kill those people, you only need to bribe 2 cooks. Then send a killer to kill those 2 cooks. No one in the world will know that we are related to this matter. Now, everyone will believe that Jahanzeb committed the murder to please the British. His relationship with the British is known even to the beggars in the city. But Salah raised his head and sighed. At this point, he could only say helplessly, I hope you can discuss it with me before making similar decisions in the future. Of course, we are the closest friends. Salah grabbed the pipe and left Sheikh Khan's villa. There are many follow-up deployments waiting for him to operate. He grew up in a Western-style family in Tunisia that was influenced by Enlightenment ideas. He could not understand the indifference of senior Indian officials under the caste system to the lives of middle and lower castes, especially the untouchables of Hindus. Note 1. In the eyes of Sheikh Khan, those 370 people were no different from the chickens and sheep in his family. When he needed to bring down his political opponents, he would kill even 30,000 people without hesitation. The massacre of released persons, fueled by Salah and others, spread throughout Mysore in less than 3 days. Countless people angrily cursed the brutal British and their lackeys, and mourned the more than 300 dead. Jahanzeb's political opponents keenly sensed the opportunity, and immediately sent a snowstorm of complaint letters to Tipu Sultan's desk. The content has also expanded from massacres to all kinds of corruption, taxation, and abuse of power, with a posture of being pushed down by everyone. Ambala Palace. Remember, I asked you to let those people go. Tipu Sultan stared at Jahanzeb coldly. And what have you done? He had just spent a lot of effort and mobilized the imperial army to finally appease the people who complained to him about the massacre. Until now, nearly 1,000 people have gathered outside the palace, waiting for the Sultan to give their dead relatives justice. Great Sultan, Jahanzeb said with difficulty, I have indeed ordered the release of those people, and I don't know why He glanced at the Shah, the financial official of Sheikh Khan's faction, and his teeth itched with hatred. In all likelihood, it was the latter who did this, or at least he was a participant, but he just couldn't accuse him. HMPH. Tipu Sultan interrupted his secretary with a simple hum. Although he was as smart as he was, he could see there was a problem early on. Even if Jahanzeb wanted to take action, he would not choose the day before his release when there were the most people watching. However, political struggle is like this. If you fall into someone else's trap, it only means that you are not smart enough or cautious enough. And if you can't think of a way to come back, then I can only give you a grand burial. It is impossible for the Sudan to stand up to the anger of the people in the country in order to protect himself. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Jahanzeb suddenly fell to the ground, hugged Tipu Sultan's feet, and said pitifully, "Moreover, those people wantonly spread rumors. Even if they die, the punishment will be slightly heavier at most. I'm willing to spend a large amount of money to compensate their families." The Shah immediately stroked Tipu Sultan's chest and said, "Your Majesty, those people are not spreading rumors at all. As far as I know, the things they said about the British are basically true." He looked at Jahanzeb coldly. The Sudanese secretary took advantage of the British and defended the British's face at every turn, even going so far as to persecute the Mysore people. In fact, he didn't know anything about the pie transaction between the British and Jahanzeb, but the British definitely had interests in it, and it wouldn't be wrong to say so casually. Jahanzeb immediately became anxious. "Great Sultan, don't listen to his nonsense." Tipu Sultan narrowed his eyes slightly, nodded and said, "Regarding those rumors, I have recently sent people to learn about them, and it is indeed true that they were all done by the British. As a relict European, he still knows something about the bad things in Britain." Of course, he did not know the specific figures as to how many Indians the British killed and how many slaves they sold. When Jahanzeb heard this, he felt like he was struck by lightning. If even the rumor making clause was gone, his actions would have completely lost the basis. "Please, for the sake of old Sultan, forgive me this time." Tip Sultan glanced at the old minister who was crying, and finally sighed after a long while. "Take out £10,000 and distribute it to the family of the deceased. I know that you have always wanted to go on a pilgrimage, but you have been busy with state affairs in recent years, so you have never been able to go. This time I will give you a few years off. You can go on a pilgrimage. It is called a pilgrimage, but in fact it is to drive away the power center of Mysore. With the current level of transportation, it will take at least 2 years to return after a pilgrimage, and there is no place for him in the political center." Jahanzeb froze all over, and it took a long time for him to faint. "Thank you for your sympathy, Great Sultan." This stupid Indian native, Griffith, a senior representative of the East India Company, kicked over the coat rack in anger. After listening to his subordinates' report on the recent massacre, Jahanzeb not only failed to control the rumors that slandered the British, but also completely eradicated the pro-British faction in Mysore. In Mysore now, who dares to say that he is pro-British will be beaten to death when he goes out. The intelligence officer who reported the situation to him added, "Sir, I also received news that Tipu is preparing to declare war on Travancore and the East India Company at the same time." "What?" Griffith grabbed his arm. "Is the information reliable?" Note 1. At that time, although Islam was in power in the kingdom of Mysore, the lower classes were still mainly Hindus, with a small number of Sikhs. Tipu Sultan implemented a tolerant religious policy, and generally speaking, the various religions in Mysore got along well. Chapter 342 Indian Quagmire. The spy of the East India Company nodded confidently. "It should be correct. I have heard the same news from multiple channels. Shah's gang surrounds Tipu all day long, and describes us as a huge threat. In addition, the people of Mysore are against us, although Sheikh Khan, Shah and others have overthrown Jahanzeb. The pro-British faction in Mysore still has considerable power. They are bound to take advantage of this anti-British trend to eliminate the influence of Britain on Mysore." Half an hour later, the spy left Griffith's office. The senior representative of the East India Company immediately asked the servants to prepare a carriage and go to the Amboila Palace to test Tipu Sultan's attitude. Tipu Sultan has been upset by the fact that the British instructed Jahanzeb to kill more than 300 people recently, so he naturally would not give him a good face. The Shah also added fuel to the fire, trying to lead the topic to the British atrocities. Griffith was scolded almost from beginning to end, and then he was driven out. Griffith left the Amboila Palace with a solemn look. According to the spy's report and Tipu Sultan's attitude today, the situation is probably very serious. 69. He immediately returned to his residence and wrote a report on the situation in Mysore. to the Governor-General of India Cornwallis and suggested temporarily withdrawing the East India Company employees in Mysore. He handed the letter to the messenger and then began to arrange for the British to evacuate without stopping. Mysore could declare war at any time, and it would be too late to evacuate after the Governor-General replied. On the other hand, Salah got the news that the British had begun to withdraw from Mysore, and he smiled immediately. The intelligence obtained by the British East India Company spies was what he asked Shah to sell to his men. In addition, a close attendant of Tipu Sultan also took his money and hinted to the outside world that the Sultan decided to take the initiative to attack the British. Coupled with the recent anti-British momentum in Mysore, the British are likely to choose to leave temporarily, a place that is not suitable for the British. If Griffith still wants to insist, then the French intelligence agency will continue to arrange some surprises for him, such as the people of Mysore looting British merchants, or even kidnapping British people. I don't believe the British can still hold on. But Salah didn't expect that Griffith would be so cooperative and chose to leave at the first time. He immediately went to Lafayette to discuss and went to see Tipu Sultan together the next morning. In the Amboyla Palace, Lafayette looked at Tipu with an anxious look on his face. Your Majesty, I have been reminding you that the British will invade Mysore again. Now the situation is very clear. They are evacuating Mysore, obviously preparing for the subsequent military offensive. Although he was somewhat disdainful of Salah's methods, the latter had already laid the groundwork, so he would not waste the opportunity. Tipu Sultan also had a gloomy face. As the ruler of Mysore, he certainly could not be unaware of the news of the British East India Company's withdrawal. Salah immediately stepped forward and began to talk about the tragic scenes of the first two Mysore wars, especially the huge damage caused to Mysore by the latter war. In fact, if Joseph did not intervene in the situation in India, the British would provoke the third Mysore war at the beginning of next year. The war was also the biggest blow to Mysore. That war caused Mysore to lose half of its territory and pay a huge compensation of £3 million, or 75 million livres. Since then, Tipu, known as the Tiger of Mysore, became a toothless tiger and was no longer able to deal with the British. He eventually died in the battle to defend Srirangapatna in the Fourth Mysore War in 1799. At this time, the British still had nearly half a year to prepare for the war. The East India Company had to bring in British troops from England, which was tens of thousands of miles away. It takes quite a long time to transport weapons and supplies. If Mysore launches a preemptive attack on Britain before then, it will cause huge losses to the latter. Although it is difficult for Mysore to completely defeat Britain with its background, the British will inevitably transfer resources from other places, such as the funds used to disgust France in North Africa, to India if they want to keep India the most dazzling jewel in the crown. In this way, France's predicament in North Africa will be immediately alleviated, and it can even increase its aid to Mysore as appropriate to further increase Britain's colonial costs. Of course, Joseph will definitely not draw his own blood to Mysore like Louis XVI did to support American independence. It is his style to get the greatest benefits at the lowest cost. Finally, Tipu Sultan could no longer remain calm when he heard Salah talk about his father Hyder's death in the war with the British. He stood up from the large golden chair and clenched his fists and said, "You are right. Instead of waiting for the British to attack Mysore again, it is better for me to take the initiative." He turned to look at the palace steward beside him. "Send an order to convene a ministerial meeting immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty." Mysore's ministerial meeting also learned from the European cabinet meeting model, with 4 ministers of finance, military, industry and commerce, and religion, plus the Sultan's secretary, currently on pilgrimage, temporarily absent, and important military generals, as the country's core political power institution. Tipu Sultan looked at Lafayette again. "If possible, I hope you can also attend this meeting." The latter immediately bowed slightly. "It is an honor, Your Majesty." At about 5 p.m., Salah, who was anxiously wandering in the outer hall of the Ambabala Palace, finally saw Lafayette and hurriedly greeted him. "My Lord Marquis, what is the result?" Lafayette adjusted his coat with a relaxed look, showing a rare smile since coming to India, and whispered, "It has been decided to go to war with Britain, and no ministers object." Salah also nodded excitedly. "That's great. This is all I can do." It's up to you next, my lord Marquis. Lafayette patted his shoulder confidently. I won't let you down, my old friend. Bringing rookies to fight, especially foreign rookies, is what Lafayette is best at. Point back then, he led the rookies of the American Continental Army and defeated the powerful British Expeditionary Force. He had visited the Mysore Army before, and it was obvious that they had undergone some European training. Although they were slightly inferior to the American militia overall, these people were more obedient. Officers could even order them to commit suicide on the spot. And the bigger advantage was that Mysore had a large number of soldiers. There were more than 58,000 soldiers before mobilization began. According to Tipu Sultan, the maximum number of soldiers that could be mobilized was about 120,000. Chapter 343 War and Military Expenditure. In addition to its military strength advantage, Mysore is also a very wealthy country. Thanks to trade with Britain, Mysore's cotton, tea, spices, indigo, and sugar were exported in large quantities, bringing a lot of wealth to the nobles, which could provide sufficient material guarantees for the country's war. To paraphrase a line from later generations, Lafayette had never fought such a rich war. Of course, the opponents he had to face were also more powerful, not to mention Britain, the world's most powerful country. The East India Company has more than 3,000 standing troops in India, which can be mobilized to about 6,000 when necessary. If troops are transferred from the British mainland, it can have 10,000 troops in 3 to 4 months. In addition, the princely states under British control and Britain's Indian allies can also provide a large number of troops, up to more than 200,000. Although the combat effectiveness of these Indian soldiers is far inferior to that of Mysore, it is definitely a big trouble, especially since these princely states can provide logistical support for the British Army, which is an important factor affecting the direction of the war. Therefore, the most important order Joseph gave Lafayette was to unite the local Indian states as much as possible, at least to win them over and not surrender to Britain. At the end of the 18th century, Britain's control over India was far less than that in the 19th century. The Indian princely states that it completely controlled did not exceed 1/5 of the total area of India, and most of them cooperated in the form of alliances. The princes of these princely states were very greedy and were easily bought by interests. Lafayette and Salah talked about the situation of the ministerial meeting just now and got on the carriage one after another. Lafayette suddenly remembered something, took out a colorful ribbon from his pocket, and showed it to Salah. Oh, Tipu Sultan also named me Umda. There seems to be a ceremony for the title at noon the day after tomorrow. I wonder if you are free to attend. Umda is the highest level military officer title in Mysore, which shows how much Tipu Sultan values Lafayette. Salah smiled and nodded. Congratulations, Marquis. I will definitely not miss such an event. Southern Netherlands eastern suburbs of Brussels. Tens of thousands of soldiers in red uniforms and white tights lined up in a long and narrow marching column, winding forward on the lush green grass accompanied by the sound of drums. The red column extended all the way to the hills in the distance and disappeared in the light mist. Not far from a 12-pound cannon, pulled by 8 horses, 2 officers were riding slowly with their guards. The man on the left wearing a golden double-breasted red uniform, 2 dark blue ribbons on his chest, thick black eyebrows, a high nose, and a handsome appearance was the current Hanoverian governor Caroline. He was muttering very quickly at this time. The guys in the southern Netherlands parliament are all a bunch of idiots. Now, the Austrian army has not been completely expelled, and the French are involved again. What are they doing? Focusing on the control of the parliament. It even affected the deployment of the army. More than 8,000 Dutch soldiers were just sitting there in Ghent, watching us fight the French, especially the one called Ankh. Those soldiers have been resting for more than a month, and he even asked them to rest until the end of the year. Let them retire in Ghent. General Karel van Bronckhorst, the commander of the Dutch volunteer army in a blue uniform, nodded helplessly and said, "Who said it wasn't? But now Ankh has a very high prestige in the southern Netherlands army, and since the last defeat at the hands of the French, their army has been very happy to rest. Ankh's order just meets their wishes." Karel second glanced at the army beside him and snorted coldly. "After defeating the Austrians, I will definitely suggest to His Majesty the King to merge the southern Netherlands parliament with the Dutch parliament." Bronkhorst was delighted when he heard this. Although Britain had been secretly promising to promote the unification of the Netherlands and the southern Netherlands, now that the commander of the Hanover army, who actually represented the will of Britain, said it himself, he felt more hopeful. He flattered Carol II, and then hesitated. "Marshal, do you think that after you defeated the French and Austrian armies, will the French continue to invest more troops in the Low Countries?" As a Dutchman, he would naturally worry about France, the giant neighbor. After all, Louis XIV almost destroyed the Netherlands decades ago. Carol II smiled disdainfully. "I remember you are a shareholder of the Bank of Amsterdam. Then you should be very clear about France's current financial situation. As a long-established financial empire in Europe, the Netherlands has its own banking business all over Europe, especially in France. More than 40% of France's foreign debts are owed to Dutch banks." General Bronkhorst nodded. "Yes, I do know something. The scale of France's debt is still over 2 billion livres." He naturally didn't know that, although the total amount of French debt had not changed much, Joseph had replaced a large part of it with low-interest debt through the previous banking tsunami, and the financial pressure was greatly reduced compared to before. Carol II looked at him and said, "You know, France maintains an army of more than 20,000 people in North Africa to guard against possible attacks from Algiers and Tripoli. At the same time, they have 30,000 troops in Silesia and 20,000 in Luxembourg. These troops stationed overseas are very expensive. France can no longer afford to support more troops, otherwise the national finances will collapse before they can decide the outcome on the battlefield." Bronkhorst also nodded in agreement. Carol II continued, "France's standing army is less than 120,000. Currently, they have stationed more than 70,000 troops in various places. Unless they recruit soldiers on a large scale, they will not have enough troops to maintain order at home." He pointed to the southeast. "So, as long as the French army in Luxembourg is defeated, the battle in the lowlands will be completely over, and our superior forces will soon complete this task." Just as the commanders of the Hanover and Dutch armies were talking, at the border between Luxembourg and Liege, Leo was looking at Lefebvre with a bitter face. "Mr. Lieutenant Colonel, my friend, maybe it's better to rest for a while. After the last pursuit battle, where he won with fewer troops, Lefebvre has been promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. General, look, your reinforcements have all arrived." Lefebvre smiled and gestured to the Austrian camp in the distance. "You can't let down the Emperor's trust, right?" In order to draw the attention of Prussia and Hanover to the southern Netherlands, Joseph II sent 8,000 soldiers to Leo, and at this time he had nearly 10,000 troops. Chapter 344 Hero of France. Leo, the commander-in-chief of the Austrian army in the southern Netherlands, looked even more bitter along with the reinforcement. There was also a secret letter from Joseph II to Luxembourg. The letter asked him to try his best to drag the French army into the battle with Prussia and Hanover, and to lead the enemy into the Luxembourg area, if necessary. However, during the time Leo had been in contact with the French army, he knew better than anyone how cunning these French people were. They encouraged themselves to fight a decisive battle with bloodshed all day long, but set up their camps behind the Austrian army, and began to build breastworks along the border between Luxembourg and Liege, which was a simple defensive fortification, as if they were ready to defend Luxembourg to the death. Previously, Leo used the excuse of insufficient troops to delay for nearly half a month. With the arrival of Joseph II's 8,000 reinforcement, he was pushed to the edge of the knife by the Emperor and the French. He looked at Lefebvre again, pleading in his tone, "My dearest friend, when I fight the Prussians, you will definitely reinforce me, right?" He had seen the combat effectiveness of Lefebvre's regiment, especially in the pursuit battle, when more than 2,000 French troops beat nearly 5,000 people in Altman's corps, and fled in panic. If he had his help, perhaps he could have fought against Blücher's 14,000 troops. Lefebvre was waiting for this sentence, but he looked very embarrassed. "I'm very happy to help you, General. We have forged friendship with blood on the battlefield. But you know that I cannot mobilize the army without authorization. To be honest, I have received orders to garrison along the Defretia mountains. But, before Leo continued to beg, Lefebvre approached his old friend very intimately and whispered, "His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is in Clairvaux. Maybe you can go and ask him His Royal Highness is warm-hearted and easy to talk to. Clairvaux, northern Luxembourg. The scene on both sides of the road was quite depressed. When the Prussian army retreated from here, they took away all the supplies they could loot. Not only were all kinds of livestock requisitioned, but even some people's sheets and quilts were taken as bandages. Joseph looked at the Luxembourg farmers who kept passing by the car window, but he was worried about military expenses. This morning he received a report from Brian from Paris, which detailed the expenses of the French army in various places during this period of time. Among them, the Tunisian army has been stationed for the longest time and has spent 4.5 million livres, although the French troops in Silesia and Luxembourg have only been mobilized for a month. The total expenditure has reached tens of millions of livres due to the fierce fighting. This is without counting the pensions for the wounded and dead soldiers, and the large amount of supplies provided by Joseph II to the French army in Silesia. If the pensions are included, the military expenditure during this period is about 17 million livres. It has only been more than a month. Joseph frowned slightly. He knew very well that, in order to achieve his strategic plan for the southern Netherlands, the war might last for half a year or even a year. The military expenditure required is definitely more than 100 million livres. In order to support the American War of Independence, France spent a full 1.3 billion livres in 8 years. And in the first few years, it was just the volunteer army fighting small battles. The real large-scale intervention began in 1780 when Count Rochambeau led 6,000 French troops into the United States, and until the independence of the United States in 1783, the annual military expenditure exceeded 300 million livres. War is a money-eating beast in any era. Although victory in the war will bring huge dividends, France needs to invest a huge amount of money in advance. If the operation is not done properly, the French finances, which have just crossed the line of life and death, may fall into the abyss again. How to raise military funds. According to the conventional operation of this era, it is generally to borrow from banks or private lenders, or issue war bonds and increase war taxes. Joseph couldn't help but sigh lightly. These are all pitfalls. The first two methods will make the national finances bear a heavy interest burden. This kind of wartime loan with extremely high risks has an interest rate of more than 40%, and raising taxes is even more harmful. He just tried his best to suppress the enthusiasm of the people in the old district, to brush the Bastille copy, but he didn't want to lose all his previous efforts because of the high tax rate. What's more, Louis XV had already increased the military service tax, and it has not been cancelled after the war. In his mind, he sorted out the means of raising large amounts of funds in the short term and the future. The first thing he thought of was paper money. It just so happens that the banknotes of the French Reserve Bank have not yet been officially announced as the only common currency in France, so they can be issued in part through this round. And doing so is beneficial to the current economic situation in France. French industry is in a stage of rapid development. At this time, appropriate inflation can stimulate consumption and is conducive to the sales of goods. Then he thought of the French commercial insurance company, and the insurance industry in later generations is an important pillar of the financial system. It's just that at the end of the 18th century, the insurance industry had not yet developed. In addition to marine insurance, there were only fire insurance and house insurance. The market is too small. Joseph thought of this, but suddenly laughed and shook his head. Isn't the thinking rigid? A small market means a large market gap. If users have no demand, then guide them to have demand. If the insurance industry can be promoted, then 1 or 2 years of military expenditure will not be a problem at all. There will even be surplus funds to invest in industrial construction. He immediately took out a pen and paper and quickly wrote on the small wooden table in the carriage: health insurance, commercial insurance, financial insurance. Soon, Joseph's motorcade stopped near the guards camp in the north of the town, and a team of soldiers on guard immediately ran over and lined up in front of the Crown Prince's carriage to greet him. From the soldiers, heads held high and their backs straight, one can see how high their morale is at this moment. Joseph smiled and nodded to the soldiers, and then asked a major who came to greet him to take him directly to the wounded camp. A farmhouse in the suburbs has been temporarily rented as a field hospital, and with the tents set up between the buildings, there are more than 300 wounded soldiers being treated here. Perna was busy shuttling back and forth with the nurses, and she heard that the crown prince was coming. So she knelt down to Joseph from a distance and was called away by the shouts of the wounded. A large number of Luxembourg locals were hired to help. Luxembourg is located at the junction of France, Germany, and Nepal. The people here are all language masters, and they have basically mastered 3 foreign languages since childhood, so there is no obstacle to coming to work. At the same time, they also had no opinion on who would rule the country. When the wounded saw the crown prince coming, they all struggled to stand up and salute, but were stopped by the accompanying officers. Instead, Joseph saluted them earnestly with his hat and said sincerely, "You are the heroes of France, and France is glorious because of your sacrifice and dedication." This book was first published by Satu, providing you with a reading experience without wrong chapters and out of order chapters. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345. Soldiers' lives are the most precious. For His Royal Highness the Dauphin, a first-term student of the Paris Police Academy wearing a sergeant's collar, looked at Joseph, touched his chest and responded loudly, as if the Dauphin was doing a routine inspection at the police academy. For His Royal Highness the Dauphin. For His Majesty the King. For glory in France. The other wounded immediately ignored their injuries and shouted, and their voices echoed throughout the field hospital. According to their inertial thinking, with the medical conditions of this era, being injured is basically equivalent to death. What awaits them will be wound infection, and after 1 to 2 weeks, they will die in a coma caused by fever, although Dr. Perner repeatedly assured them that only 2 out of 10 people would die from infection. The soldiers only thought she was comforting themselves. Therefore, at this time, they all treated His Royal Highness the Dauphin as the last time they met him before his death, and bravely said goodbye to him. Of course, some young people curled up in their beds in depression, but they also gritted their teeth and did not make any complaints. Today, the pursuit of honor by the guards has become a consensus and habit, making them unwilling to show any cowardice. The staff officer following Joseph immediately read out the list of meritorious and honored people in public, which immediately attracted cheers, as if death was not a big deal in the eyes of these young men. The Luxembourg people who helped around couldn't help but look sideways, not understanding why these dying soldiers were crazy. Such a scene would happen every time Joseph passed a tent or a farmhouse. More than half of these wounded were cadets from the Paris Police Academy. He often saw them in the police academy, and some of them could even be called by name. But at this time, seeing the blood-soaked bandages on their missing hands and feet, he couldn't help but feel sad. In fact, these wounded have already received initial treatment. Yesterday, many soldiers were wailing in the pain of amputation, and their bloody uniforms were thrown everywhere, which was much more tragic than now. These unknown young people, with their blood and youth, supported the prosperity and stability of France. But they can only live with disability for the rest of their lives. After leaving the last tent, Joseph turned to look at the chief of staff Berthier, who was following behind him, and whispered, "Increase the casualty pension by 20%. The wounded soldiers should try to arrange for work in government departments. The living security of the families of the wounded soldiers should also be improved. Let everyone know that it is worthwhile to sacrifice for France, and France will not forget them." "Yes, Your Highness." Berthier nodded and took note, without mentioning the tight military budget. When Joseph left the field hospital, he lowered his head and thought that if the bulletproof vests of later generations could be developed, the casualties of soldiers could be greatly reduced. In fact, there were primitive bulletproof vests in this era. Breastplates, however, this thing is made of pure iron. In the face of increasingly sophisticated flintlock rifles, the thickness must reach more than 2 mm to play a life-saving role. The problem is that the weight cannot be controlled at all. A qualified breastplate weighs between 20 and 25 pounds. This weight does not seem to be exaggerated, but you have to know that this is an additional weight, which is added on the basis of carrying firearms and individual luggage. And it has to be worn all the time when fighting, and even the most physically strong soldiers can hardly hold on for half a day. In addition, there is the price. The price of an ordinary breastplate is more than 120 livres, and there is no upper limit for high quality ones. This has led to only some cavalrymen who conduct frontal assaults are willing to equip this thing. The weight is borne by the horses anyway, and the equipment of cavalry is very expensive, so they don't need the money for this breastplate. This is a very famous breastplate. Cavalry point. As for infantry, only a few supermen will equip some breastplates, mainly to deter the opposing infantry point. So, can the breastplate be improved with some later technology? Joseph quickly shook his head slightly. Point. Whether it is alloy smelting or Kevlar fiber, it is far from the technology that can be played in this era. Point. And using only steel forging cannot significantly reduce the weight. Joseph returned to his temporary office and was still at a loss. Perhaps it would be more practical to improve the level of medical and healthcare. Point. At this moment, he inadvertently caught a glimpse of the Luxembourg soldiers standing at the entrance of the street, actually the police who maintain order, wearing grey square uniforms, and his eyes lit up immediately. Yes, how did I fall into a thinking error? Who says you need armor to protect against bullets? Joseph remembered that someone in later generations had calculated that casualties caused by bullets in the torso accounted for 70% of the total casualties of soldiers. In other words, as long as the torso is protected, most casualties can be avoided. Point. This is also an important reason why breastplates are popular, and Joseph also knew a more convenient and simple equipment to protect the torso: bulletproof inserts. In later generations, Teobeo sold hundreds of millions of these life-saving gadgets to soldiers all over the world, and they have also been proven to be very effective on many battlefields. From Africa to Eastern Europe. Point. The so-called bulletproof insert is generally a thin plate the size of a tablet computer, which is inserted into the pocket on the chest and abdomen of the military uniform when used. It is light in weight, has good bulletproof effect, and can also be inserted only in front of the body, regardless of the back, according to the situation on the battlefield. Point. In this way, the overall weight can be basically controlled within 10 pounds. Point. Joseph recalled the structure of the bulletproof insert: a layer of metal sheet, a layer of Kevlar, a layer of ceramic sheet, and another layer of Kevlar, which were bonded together. The manufacturing process was very simple. Point. Of course, there was definitely no Kevlar in this era, but silk could be used instead. In ancient times, officers used multiple layers of silk clothing to protect against bows and arrows. Because silk has excellent toughness, the effect was still good. Point. Although silk is not as strong as Kevlar, it only needs to face lead bullets fired by black powder, so the strength should be sufficient. Point. And special ceramic technology is definitely not available, so only ordinary hard ceramics can be used. Point. For the same reason that the power of the enemy's weapons is limited, this can also be replaced. Point. As for the adhesive, Joseph was a little unsure, and he could only ask Lavoisier to help him find a solution. Point. If it can be made, the unit price of such a youth version bulletproof insert will not exceed 5 livres at most. A soldier is equipped with 5 pieces, which is only 25 livres, which is completely affordable. Point. He hurried back to his office, wrote down the idea of the new equipment, and was about to write a letter to Lavoisier when he saw Emin knocking on the door and bowing, saying, "Your Highness, General Leo wants to see you." Leo? Joseph smiled. The commander was finally here, so he nodded and said, "Please let him in." Chapter 346. The cornerstone of the Western Empire. Leo quickly walked into the office of the French Crown Prince, bowed very respectfully, and was about to speak, but Joseph showed a surprised look and said anxiously, "General Leo, why are you still in the town of Clairvaux?" "Ah." Leo was stunned and said subconsciously, "Shouldn't I be here?" Joseph grabbed the document that had been prepared on the table and handed it to him. "This was sent by our intelligence officers in the Netherlands last night. Hanover's 20,000 troops have left Brussels and are heading to Liege to reinforce Blücher." Leo's heart immediately tightened. He picked up the document and looked at it carefully. He saw that it contained the news that Karel II was leading his army south, and that there were 4,000 Dutch volunteers accompanying him. Joseph said earnestly, "General, if 24,000 troops join Blücher, it may be difficult to complete your important task of recovering the southern Netherlands." Leo's eyes twitched. Faced with nearly 40,000 Prussian, Han, and Dutch coalition forces, there was a high probability that he would be driven back to Austria. If he wanted to recover the southern Netherlands, Joseph looked at him sideways and continued, "You are the cornerstone to repel Blücher and stabilize the situation in the southern Netherlands. His Majesty the Emperor has also dispatched heavy troops from Silesia to you. If you are unable to complete His Majesty's mission, trust me, this will damage your previous reputation. The first release of this book bar provides you with a reading experience with no wrong chapters, and no chapters out of order. In order to put Leo on the grind, he had previously exaggerated the latter's contribution in the battle with the Prussian army, and in his letter to Joseph II, he portrayed it as the main reason for defeating Blücher. Wear it 1,000 times, but flattery never wears it. Although Leo knew that these were all the contributions of the French army, how could he refuse the great contribution that came to his door? So he accepted it half-heartedly. A large number of awards and praises from Vienna overwhelmed him like a tsunami. Joseph II even called him the cornerstone of the Western Empire. It's just that he hasn't had a month of fun before he has to face a difficult battle with tens of thousands of enemy troops. Joseph looked like he was thinking about him, took 2 steps closer and whispered, "General Leo, I admire your bravery very much, so I must remind you of some things. I don't need to say more about the importance of the southern Netherlands to Austria. If this place is lost, my uncle will have to find someone to take responsibility. Yes, it was mainly because of General Wilms's unfavorable battle that the situation in the southern Netherlands fell into a bad situation. But now he is an important commander in Silesia and has a deep political background. My uncle will probably not blame him either." Uncle he was talking about was Joseph I. Leo's face became even more ugly when he heard this. How could he not understand what the French crown prince meant? If he is defeated by the Prussian and Han coalition forces, then the responsibility for losing the southern Netherlands will fall on himself. Not only will the aura of being the cornerstone of the West disappear, but he will probably spend the rest of his life in a penal colony in Transylvania. He suddenly became excited and looked at Joseph eagerly. "Your Highness, actually, this is why I came to you. I hope you will allow Lieutenant Colonel Lefebvre to lead his regiment to assist me in attacking the Prussian army in Liege. If Blücher can be defeated before the Hanovers arrive, then we can reach Namur to the east of Brussels. A defensive line was established on the side and faced off against Karl II. His Majesty the Emperor will definitely continue to send more reinforcement to me. If I can regain the southern Netherlands, I will definitely not forget your great kindness." Joseph spread his hands in embarrassment, but my uncle did not ask France to help attack the Prussian army. You know, if the French soldiers entered the southern Netherlands rashly, my uncle would probably have misunderstanding. The miserable scene of his defeat and exile appeared in Leo's mind again, and he only knew how to desperately grasp the last life-saving straw in front of him, and begged, "Your Highness, you only need to order Lieutenant Colonel Lefebvre to send troops. His Majesty the Emperor. I will explain the situation to him." Joseph still shook his head. "Then let's wait until uncle agrees before deploying troops," Leo hurriedly said. "Don't worry, I will ask General Wilms and Count Cornitz for help. I have some friendship with them. Your Majesty will definitely approve of your assistance in recovering the southern Netherlands." A smile flashed across Joseph's lips, and he pretended to shirk it for a while, then reluctantly nodded. "Well, I can't watch you get into a hard fight, right? But I feel that if we want to launch an attack, we should not stick to Blücher." "What do you mean?" "If the Prussians hold on, it will be difficult for you to capture Liege before the Hanovers arrive. Therefore, you'd better allocate some of your forces to hold off Karl II and the Dutch." Leo's mouth was bitter. Of course he understood the truth, but he only had 10,000 soldiers in total. Now he asked the French for 1.5 regiments, so that he could barely fight against Blücher. Where would he get the extra troops to snipe the Hanover army? Joseph seemed to be excited about the conversation and said smoothly, "Speaking of the Netherlands, France has given them a lot of support before, but they want to stand with Hanover. You know, this is tantamount to forming an alliance with the British. If I have the chance, I will teach these ungrateful Dutch people a lesson." Leo looked at him in surprise. "Your Highness, there are 4,000 Dutch troops east of Brussels right now. This is a good opportunity for you to vent your anger. Joseph seemed very hesitant, but in this case, our army may encounter them in the Brabant area. Don't worry, I will explain it to His Majesty the Emperor. After another round of evasion, Joseph reluctantly nodded again. Then you must tell your uncle that this is your battle plan. In fact, this is the plan he came up with after half a month of discussion with the entire staff. To march into the southern Netherlands, all actions must use Leo as a signboard. Let Leo's army fight with the Prussians in Liege, and then the French army bypassed Liege, and went straight into the heart of the southern Netherlands. By the time Austria reacted, Brussels was already the French garrison, and Joseph II couldn't find any problems with France. All the plans were made by your subordinate Leo. The French army invited to enter the southern Netherlands, and also help to repel the Han and Dutch coalition forces, and deal with the rebellion of the Dutch. You Austria has helped so much, you have to express your gratitude, right? Leo nodded repeatedly after hearing this. Yes, your highness, I will never make it difficult for you. He had his own little calculations in mind. If he could really recover the southern Netherlands with the help of the French army, then as the person who formulated the full set of combat plans, he could at least get the title of Marshal, and it would not be impossible for him to enter the political center of Vienna, southwest of Silesia. The main battlefield of Liegnitz. General Kellerman, the commander of the French volunteer army in the Silesia expedition, turned his head and glanced in the direction of the artillery sound in the distance. He frowned slightly, picked up the chess piece next to him, and placed it near the king on the opposite side. You see, if we continue like this, it will definitely be a draw. Chapter 347 The Regret of Emperor Shinra. Yes, General, it's a tie. The staff officer sitting across from the chessboard pushed his chair back and looked east. It's just like this damn battle. This book is first published on providing you with a reading experience with no wrong chapters or chapters out of order. After playing chess for most of the day, General Kellerman, who felt quite bored, stood up and stretched. I heard from the hussar that there is a good river on the border of Gullitz, and the trout are very fat. Let's go there tomorrow. Let's go fishing. Of course that's good, the staff officer said. It's just that it's close to Saxony, and may not be safe. It doesn't matter, just bring more guards. Kellerman put on his coat and lazily walked out of the tent. Another roar of cannons was heard in the distance. He originally thought that he could establish meritorious service in Austria and boost the momentum of the military's decline in the past 6 months. Since the rebellion of the Marquis of St. Villain, the military has been severely suppressed by the royal family and is in urgent need of a big victory to regain its prestige. However, after the initial raid was ambushed by the Prussians and nearly 1,000 people were lost, he never got any chance to participate in the battle. The Austrian army and the Prussian army set up a large number of artillery pieces on the hills of Liegnitz. The former had more than 230 guns and the latter 190 guns. Then they began to bombard each other day and night. The dense defense line formed by artillery prevented the infantry on both sides from showing up easily. They did not have the courage to charge in columns like the French Guards Corps. After entering the range of the artillery, they would immediately retreat after a brief attempt. This is also the most popular combat mode used by the Prussian and Austrian armies in recent decades. They use a large number of fixed artillery positions to stabilize the position, and then find the enemy's weak links to break through with heavy troops. It's just that the commanders on both sides are well aware of this. After the 7 Years' War and the battle for the Bavarian throne, they are also very familiar with the other party's military habits, so they are all on guard. In this way, the artillery lines of the two sides stretched for several kilometers for a month. Except for the unlucky ones who were blinded by the opposite artillery shells every now and then, almost no results were produced. The loss of a small amount of artillery could be immediately replenished for big countries like Prussia and Austria, so the war situation in Silesia was so stagnant. However, neither country dared to withdraw its troops easily. They were only worried that the other side would suddenly increase its troops and forcibly break through its own artillery positions. So a total of more than 200,000 troops from both sides came to the front line every day, lined up to watch the fireworks show, and then ate and slept. It was a very relaxed and comfortable life. Only the treasurers of Prussia and Austria were not at ease. Maintaining such an army costs a lot of money. Leopold II ended his inspection of the Silesian front and returned to Vienna with a gloomy face. He knew very well that, although Prussia and Austria were still in balance, and Austria even had a slight advantage in terms of military strength, from a strategic perspective, Austria was heading towards failure. As the party concentrating all its forces to launch an offensive. Austria is still lingering on the edge of Silesia without making any decisive progress in terms of finance. Prussia, which implemented militarism, was far more tolerant than Austria. As long as the serfs of the former had potatoes to eat, they did not dare to have any dissatisfaction with the Junkers. At the same time, the Junkers nobles were willing to go to the front line to win military honors with little or no salary. On the Austrian side, due to his brother's reforms, taxation faced resistance from the nobles. Once there were financial problems due to this war, the entire country would collapse. Therefore, we must open up the situation in Silesia as soon as possible and use victory in the war to stabilize the domestic situation. While Leopold II was deep in thought, the carriage stopped at the Schönbrunn Palace Square. He hurried to Joseph II's bedroom, gathered his thoughts outside the door, and then knocked on the door, and entered. After reporting on the situation in Silesia, he looked at his weak brother and said seriously, "Your Majesty, we must carry out large-scale mobilization as soon as possible, otherwise our finances will not be able to continue to support the war by the end of this year at most." He did not need to remind the emperor on his bed of the desperate situation Austria would face once Silesia was defeated. Based on what I saw on the battlefield, at least 80,000 more troops would have to be recruited to make a rapid advance in Liegnitz possible. Joseph II looked out the window for a long time before speaking with difficulty. "You know, the current situation in our country cannot be done." Leopold II gritted his teeth, took a step forward, and said in a deep voice, "Brother, it's time to suspend reforms. As long as the traditional rights of those nobles are restored, and extra wages are stopped being paid to serfs, the nobles of Hungary and Kiev will immediately be able to organize an army of more than 100,000 people, and at the same time, they can also raise a large amount of funds from them. In this case, not only Silesia, we can even advance to Lusatia. Lusatia is already the traditional territory of Prussia, and also includes some provinces in eastern Saxony. He did not wait for Joseph II to refuse, and continued, "And the southern Netherlands rebels will also lose the support of the nobles, which will ease the turmoil in the western part of the empire. I know this is a difficult decision for you, but as long as we can take back Silesia, you will use the prestige brought by the victory in the war to re-implement the reform, and it will definitely be smoother than now." Joseph II sighed woodenly. The reforms he devoted most of his energy to in his life became an obstacle to the country's victory. After a long while, he shook his head dejectedly. "Let me think about it again. After all, it was just a little bit away from success." Leopold II was about to persuade him again, but heard Joseph II change the subject. "Leo has made a plan to attack the southern Netherlands in an all-out manner, and he needs 10,000 troops. Can you transfer some of them?" Leopold II took Leo's letter from his brother's attendant, quickly read it, and said hesitantly, "Does he plan to let the French deal with the Hanover army?" Karel II brought 20,000 troops and several thousand Dutch. If the French army fights them in the southern Netherlands, it should be a stalemate for a long time. Joseph II paused for a while before continuing. "Archbishop Constantine promised me that he would gather forces loyal to him to attack Blücher from the north. Leo will definitely be able to break through earlier and then capture Brussels. Oh, General Wurmser also agrees with this plan. Constantine is the Archbishop of the Diocese of Liege. As an independent territory of the Holy See, the Archbishop has great power here." Leopold II was silent for a moment, then bowed his head and said, "I will find a way to send reinforcement to General Leo, Your Majesty." After he left Joseph II's bedroom, he whispered a decision must be made, then returned to the carriage, and ordered to go to the residence of Minister of State Cornitz, Luxembourg City. Joseph took advantage of the short break before the guards went to Brussels to come to this historic city, and presided over the ceremony for the French Iron and Steel Technical Association to acquire Luxembourg's 11 iron mines and the two largest smelting workshops. Chapter 348 The Dividend of War. Although Luxembourg is still nominally an Austrian territory, this does not prevent French merchants from coming here to conduct some normal trade. The Austrian officials in Luxembourg have heard the news that His Majesty the Emperor is going to give Luxembourg to France as a reward for the latter sending troops to fight Prussia, so they did not interfere with these business activities. Moreover, there are 20,000 French troops stationed in Luxembourg, a tiny piece of land that is not even a quarter the size of Corsica. Even if they have opinions, they dare only complain to acquaintances in the salon. In the Place de l'Artoum in Luxembourg City, the Secretary General of the French Steel Technology Association smiled and handed the signed agreements to the Luxembourg mine owners sitting opposite one by one. The mine owners immediately grabbed the pen in a hurry, signed the agreement, and stamped it with their private seals, as if they were afraid that the French would go back on their word. After the agreement was signed, the notary and the lawyer announced that the agreement was effective. The mine owners smiled relaxedly and whispered to each other, "Now we don't have to worry about the war destroying everything." I didn't expect the French to be willing to take over these iron mines. Yes, although 30,000 livres is not much, it is enough for a family to live comfortably in Vienna. Oh, I plan to go to Brussels. Of course, I have to wait until the rebellion there is quelled. Yes, the whole Luxembourg is currently shrouded in the shadow of war, especially the previous Prussian soldiers not very strict military discipline, which makes the merchants here panic. There have been rumors among the people that the Prussian and Hanoverian armies will have a decisive battle with the French army in Luxembourg. Such a small place, how can it withstand the destruction of 70,000 or 80,000 troops on both sides? After the war, there must be scorched earth everywhere. Therefore, all Luxembourgers are eager to sell their assets. The high quality open pit iron, or that was difficult to buy before with hundreds of thousands of livres, is now directly reduced by zero, and buyers have to beg for it before it can be sold. In the middle of the VIP seats in front, Joseph also had a satisfied smile on his face. He bought all of these more than 10 of the best iron mines in Europe for less than 800,000 livres in total, which is simply a bargain. Luxembourg's steel production will almost meet the needs of the entire Western Europe in the future. With these iron mines, it will play a strong supporting role in France's industrial revolution. If the industrial revolutions of European countries enter a stage of rapid development and the demand for coal and iron surges, the value of these iron mines may exceed 100 million livres. As for the war, even if half of France's military force is transferred to Luxembourg, Joseph will not let it be affected by the war because he has absolute confidence in regional stability. He even took advantage of this wave of sales to buy a lot of handicraft workshops and high quality land. The former can provide a large number of skilled smelting and mining workers, and the latter is used to build ironworks. In fact, several of France's most rapidly developing steel making companies, including Grigor Brothers Steel and Silk Steel, have already arrived in Luxembourg City, waiting to expand new plants here. They have long been fed up with the low yield and mediocre iron ore in France. Previously, they had to import a large amount of iron ore from Russia or buy crude iron ingots from Luxembourg, which was very costly. Now, their smelter can be built directly next to the iron ore, and the price of ore is extremely favorable, which will greatly improve the cost, quality, and output of the iron ingots they produce. In particular, they had obtained Joseph's hot blast iron making technology from the French Steel Technology Association. After half a year of exploration, they have basically mastered it and completed small-scale trial production in China. Now it is just right to use the new technology to build a factory in Luxembourg, and the refined iron and steel produced can be sold to German countries nearby to obtain lucrative profits for Joseph. As long as he holds the core source of iron ore firmly, he does not have to worry about these private capitals losing control. After all, to develop the coal and iron industry of the whole France, it is far from enough to rely solely on royal investment and operation. Private enterprises must be encouraged to participate to the greatest extent. Joseph can provide them with advanced technology and ideas, and help them open up the market with state actions to ensure that every lever of investment can get a considerable return point after these private companies develop. They can contribute a lot of taxes to support the French finances and ultimately bring about an improvement in the overall national strength point. This is also the first dividend brought by France after winning the war in Luxembourg. Moreover, Luxembourg is a very small place, and it is close to France. Before the industry develops, it will not attract too much attention from the powers. It is definitely the best choice for France to expand its overseas influence point. After the signing ceremony, Joseph read a congratulatory speech in the crowd, and then motioned everyone to go to the signing banquet. But he was planning in his heart that, if he could obtain the Wallonia region of the southern Netherlands in the future, how to combine the rich coal resources there with the iron resources of Luxembourg, to become the coal and iron core of France's industrial development. Then, Joseph thought of the security issues in this area again, and couldn't help frowning. After all, Wallonia and Luxembourg are both located in the most marginal areas of France. Once a war breaks out, the enemy can easily attack here, causing huge damage to France's coal and iron core. So, it is best to turn Wallonia and Luxembourg into inland provinces, so that we can have a certain strategic depth. Joseph boarded the carriage and looked out the window at the Luxembourg and Luxembourg people who were flocking to the banquet hall with smiles on their faces. The French businessman couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Everyone can just enjoy the results, but he has to worry about the whole of France. Paris Eden Playground. Wow, it's like flying into the sky, accompanied by childish cheers. The little girl sitting on the merry-go-round tightly grasped the handle with one hand and raised her other hand high like a riding crop, letting her goose yellow skirt and beautiful braid fly in the wind. And her gentle big blue eyes were full of excitement and intoxication. After the wooden horse turned around again, she turned her baby fat face and shouted to the boardman standing outside the fence, "Uncle Alexei, can you make it fly faster?" "Oh, Her Majesty Grand Duchess Alexandra, I told you not to call me that." Alexei lowered his voice and put on a dissatisfied expression. "There are no outsiders here, but..." He still winked at the guard on the side, who immediately ran to ask the amusement park employees, then quickly returned and whispered a few words to him. Chapter 349 Alexei's Nemesis. The first release of this book provides you with a reading experience with no wrong chapters and no out of order chapters. "Oh, okay." Alexandra pouted and changed her words. "Count Bobulinski, I want to fly faster. I'm afraid it can't be done." Alexei spread his hands. "They said this is already the limit speed, but they will replace the high pressure steam engine next month. It seems to be called this, and then it can go faster soon." The little girl exhaled in disappointment. That will have to wait for a long time, but fortunately we have to stay in Paris for a while." As she was talking, a bell rang nearby and the carousel slowly stopped. The little girl jumped off the wooden horse, glanced around with a pair of big eyes, and pointed at the winding waterway of rapid rapids not far away. "I'm going to play that. I remember the last time I was in Paris, it wasn't there yet." Alexei glanced at the scorching sun above his head, ignored the handkerchief handed over by the valet next to him, wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, and said with a grimace, "It's such a hot day. Maybe we can wait until it's cloudy to play again. You also said that we will stay here for a long time." "That's not possible." Alexandra touched Mickey beside her and pulled her uncle towards the rapids without any explanation. "What you just bought is a play ticket. You can't waste it. A 30 livre free ticket allows you to play any item in the amusement park until dark. If it hadn't been for that damn cold winter," Alexei said with a helpless expression as he was dragged forward by the 7-year-old girl, "we could have arrived in Paris in early summer, and the weather shouldn't have been so torturous then." People, in fact, Catherine II asked him to set off with his granddaughter at the end of last year. However, not long after he left Petersburg, he encountered a terrible cold that had been rare in decades, and the temperature dropped to below zero. It was 30 degrees, and their breath turned to ice. At that time, the whole of Europe, including France, was experiencing a cold winter, so they had no choice but to return to the winter palace point. As we all know, after the cold winter in Russia, what ushered in was not a warm spring suitable for traveling, but a muddy ground where melted snow mixed with soil. Regardless of whether it is a person or a horse, every step on this road requires 3 kicks or hooves to get rid of the entanglement of the mud point. So they waited until early summer before setting off for Paris. Alexandra glanced at her uncle and smiled sweetly. If you had not discussed poetry with Mrs. Solankiewicz in Kremenets for more than a month, and had not stayed with Miss Isabella in Prague for more than 40 days, we would indeed have been able to stay in the cool. Arriving here in early summer, she bared her teeth again and added seriously, if I hadn't been thinking about coming to the amusement park, you might still be at Miss Isabella's place. Cough. Alexei hurriedly interrupted his niece with a dry cough, then looked around guiltily and saw that no one seemed to hear him, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. What Alexandra just said, the words were spoken in French. If others heard this, I would probably become a new talking point in the Paris aristocratic circle tomorrow. He quickly put Alexandra on the boat that was rushing through the rapids and said with an enthusiastic smile, you can play as long as you want. Well, actually it's not too hot. 2 hours later, Alexandra played all the rides twice and finally decided to return to her residence with satisfaction. After boarding the carriage parked outside the gate, she reluctantly looked at the facilities in the amusement park and sighed. I heard that these were designed by His Royal Highness the Dauphin of France. I really don't know why he is so smart. Alexei, who was exhausted from the intense heat, answered angrily, he is a prince. It is normal to be smarter than ordinary people. The little girl looked at him seriously, as if thinking about something. Uncle Alexei, speaking of which, you are also a prince. Then you can definitely help me build an Eden playground in Petersburg. I will be very grateful to you. Cough, cough. Alexei almost choked to death on his niece, but fortunately he had gotten used to it, so he immediately changed the subject. Tomorrow is Mr. Gruz's first lecture. Do you need to prepare in advance? When Alexandra heard about things related to painting, she immediately became serious. You are right. I should check the paints. After all, they are all brought from far away Vienna. And tomorrow's clothes, it is best to choose them in advance. She liked Mr. Gruz's paintings very much, and one of her goals in coming to Paris this time was to learn painting skills from him. Drawing is her favorite subject of study. The next day. Jean-Baptiste Gruz, the famous French melancholic painter who created The Guitarist, is in his villa in the Louvre district of Paris. Several aristocratic girls in luxurious clothes were sitting demurely on chairs in front of Gruz, listening to him talk about portrait composition techniques, but the ladies would glance at the youngest girl sitting in the middle from time to time, with curiosity and a little repulsion in their eyes. In a brief introduction before class, they learned that the girl was a Russian Grand Duchess named Alexandra Pavlovna, who seemed to be the eldest daughter of the Russian Crown Prince. However, in their view, the Russians were just a group of semi-civilized tatters who tried their best to imitate France, but could not imitate them. In short, she was a bumpkin. So, even though she was an archduchess, they didn't think she was a big deal. On the contrary, they felt very confused that a bumpkin could come to the famous Mr. Gruz's class soon. Gruz finished the theoretical part, and after drawing some examples on the spot, he called his maid to be a model, and told the students to use the techniques he had just taught to paint a portrait of this 30-year-old lady. The students came to the studio. Alexandra set up the easel, took out the precious pigment she brought from Vienna, tightened her little face, and began to paint seriously. In the afternoon, Gruz returned to the studio. When his eyes swept over the works of several students, his face showed disappointment. Although these disciples were of noble birth and paid him high tuition fees, to be honest, their painting talents were very average. If he was not trying to supplement his family income, he really didn't want to waste his precious time on them. Until he saw the paintings of the little girl who had just come today, he was stunned. Her painting skills were indeed not mature enough, and even her basic sketching skills were a bit poor, but she understood the skills he had just taught very thoroughly, as if she had practiced them many times. What surprised him even more was that there was a unique spirituality in her paintings, which made people feel that there was a beating heart in the colors she painted. Chapter 350 Money Ability? I have it too. Mr. Gruz continued to watch quietly until Alexandra's painting was completed. He finally breathed out with a surprised smile. Your Majesty the Grand Duchess, you are truly the most talented student I have ever seen. You painted Jonah full of life. Jonah was the maid working as a model in front of the studio. As he spoke, Gruz caught a glimpse of other students' homework and couldn't help but shake his head subconsciously inside. Callous, Marissa, maybe you should take a look at the paintings of Grand Duchess Alexandra. You have been studying with me for 4 or 5 years. In a sense, it seems that you have not yet touched the soul of painting. I hope you can understand something from this painting. The 3 aristocratic girls next to them looked at each other immediately, with dissatisfaction on their faces. After all, the youngest among them was 11 years old, and Caloris was already 14 years old. But their teacher asked them to learn from a 7-year-old Russian bumpkin. Several people gathered around reluctantly, but their poor artistic skills prevented them from seeing the soul Mr. Gruz mentioned in Alexandra's paintings. Gruz commented on Alexandra's paintings again, mostly with words of praise and encouragement. Then he looked at his watch, announced that classes would continue next Tuesday, said goodbye to a few noble girls, turned and left the Studio 69 book bar 69. Marissa pretended to pull Alexandra's easel and looked at the latter's paintings up and down with exaggerated movements, as if saying to herself, did the teacher drink today? Her father was the second assistant to the French Minister of Agriculture, and the family was still a hereditary count, so she had no fear of the Grand Duchess from Russia. Another aristocratic girl next to him immediately responded, that should be it. Otherwise how could he comment on such an ordinary painting for more than 10 minutes? You actually want us to understand something from this painting? Well, the paint is pretty good. Callus also got weird. No wonder they are like this. Gruz actually said that they could not draw as well as a rude Tartar girl. This was simply an insult to their painting skills. They were both born and raised in the Palace of Versailles and have been influenced by art since childhood. Many celebrities have praised their talents, so how could they not be able to compare with a Russian country bumpkin? But they couldn't criticize the art master Gruz, so they turned to spread their dissatisfaction on Alexandra. The little Russian girl took back her painting and motioned to the maid to put it away carefully. Then she turned to the aristocratic girls and smiled sweetly, saying in pure French, if you can use the time and energy of saying these nonsense words to practice for painting, maybe your teacher won't have to praise a transfer student. After she finished speaking, she completely ignored the looks of those people and turned around and walked outside the studio. You. Marissa stamped her feet in shame, pointed at Alexandra's back and screamed, don't think you are really good at drawing. The teacher just sees you as a child and gives you a few words of encouragement. That's all. She gestured to the 2 noble girls beside her. Everyone here has a much better painting skill than you. Let me tell you, the paintings of Callus and Miss Stella have been selected for the Lorraine Charlie Castle Art Exhibition. Oh, you probably haven't heard of the Sherry Castle Art Exhibition. If the painting you just painted can also be selected for the art exhibition, we will admit that you are a pretty good painter. But if you cannot participate in the exhibition, then you must apologize to us. In fact, it was only because their family had some friendship with the curator of the art exhibition that they were able to place their paintings in an inconspicuous small room in Sherry Castle. It was considered a bit of a buzz, but it was not considered participating in the exhibition at all. Not interested. Alexandra only turned her head and glanced at the 3 of them, then strode towards the carriage in the yard. Several noble girls felt that they had regained their place, and they suddenly became proud. She is self-aware. Of course, it's a top-notch art exhibition that the royal family will attend in person. Her crappy paintings can't even get in. She should really go see the Sherry Castle Art Exhibition. It is simply a wonder immersed in a sea of art. Alexandra got on the carriage and didn't hear what they were saying clearly. She just felt that the name Lorraine Charlie Castle Art Exhibition was a bit familiar. Where Have you heard that? She looked at the majestic Louvre Museum in the distance and quickly forgot about it. 3 days later, northern suburbs of Paris. Carriages came one after another outside the luxurious Charlie Castle, where 600 to 700 nobles gathered to participate in the famous Lorraine Charlie Castle painting exhibition. It used to be a monastery. It was bought and converted into a castle-like manor. It later gradually developed into a painting and art center. There is still a short period of time before the exhibition starts, and Mr. Filiberto, the chief organizer of the exhibition, is checking the guest list for the last time. Since the royal family comes to Charlie Castle every year during the exhibition, no detail can be neglected. At this moment, the office door was pushed open, and his assistant almost jogged to his desk and whispered a few words in his ear. Filiberto suddenly frowned and turned to look at his assistant. "Are you sure?" The latter nodded. "Many noble ladies in the Palace of Versailles have heard about this. It should be Miss Marissa who is showing off to them. I went to Mr. Gruz's house again in the morning to verify it. His maid witnessed the whole thing. This is a bit troublesome." Filiberto thought for a moment and told his assistant, "Announced to the public that termites were found in the exhibition room on the second floor." "Yes, Mr. Manager." After the assistant left, Filiberto rubbed his eyebrows in annoyance. The conflicts between these noble ladies are the most troublesome. The second lady of Count Lemaire's family chose to conflict with the Russian Grand Duchess at this time. Although Count Lemaire has some friendship with him, Count Bobulinski of Russia is the main sponsor of this exhibition, providing 75% of the funds needed for the exhibition. You can't offend anyone but him. Therefore, the paintings of the two ladies who boasted that their works could be exhibited, but the Russian Grand Duchess could not, could only disappear soon. The grand exhibition officially opened. Hundreds of nobles entered the exhibition hall in an orderly manner under the guidance of the servants of Charlotte Castle. Carolus and Marissa proudly led a group of young nobles to the room in the southwest corner of the second floor, boasting along the way that was a painting that Mr. Gruz praised, so it was natural for it to be exhibited. They entered the room where they were scheduled to display their works, but found it empty. Carolus thought she had gone to the wrong place, so she checked the room number again and again, and looked at several rooms next to it, but she still didn't see her own paintings. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.